We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com.
Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. My name is Rob H., and this week I am here with...
Joe Klusnick, back again.
Yes, you are indeed. If you were listening to last week's episode, this is a clue. Tom is not here this week, and while we try to keep things pretty lighthearted around here as much as we can, it is not good news over in Tom's neck of the woods. Now, I want to begin by saying every person in his family is physically okay. And that is, of course, the main thing by a country mile. Nothing matters nearly as much as the safety of the people in the family, and they are all okay. So you can rest easy hearing me say that much. But in terms of property damage, it is bad. It is really bad. This is all coming after Hurricane Helene. If you're listening to this at some point in the future and trying to figure out what was going on in history while we're talking about this, Tom did share just a couple of photos of the outside of his house on Facebook, and so that's like freely and publicly available. So not any problem showing that here. You can't really make out much, but this is on the outside of the house. You're going to see this horizontal blackish line running along the outside wall there, and that is the height that the water came up to, and it was maybe a foot higher than that inside the house as it poured in and sloshed around. So if you're looking at that height, everything got soaked. You know, you can put two and two together when it's like 3.5-4 feet high on the inside. So even stuff that they had, placed on top of other things to try and keep it above water, if it had been a foot of water inside, there was a fair amount that they might have been able to save, but not with the water coming up that high. So, pretty darn devastating. Pretty much all of their belongings ruined, and the house is like a virtually complete restoration is going to be needed. I wish I had happier news to share, but that is simply the situation that Tom is dealing with right now. On top of that, his parents' place flooded to a similar extent. And he just talked last week a fair amount. His brother still lives with his parents. His brother is autistic, and as Tom has mentioned, does not deal well with change. So you can imagine, the sort of havoc that this is wreaking on the family. Clearly Tom is not going to be back on the podcast for we don't know how long. His house is actually a little bit higher in elevation amongst his neighborhood. So many of his neighbors got it even worse than Tom's house did, which means that, finding accommodations locally, houses to rent, that type of thing for a family like they have, not exactly the easiest thing to come by. Might have to go fairly far away to do all that. If you really only want to focus on home theater, it's not happy news. All of Tom's home theater gear is basically destroyed. He said that when he got in there, the water was high enough. He has his AV receiver in an equipment rack. The water was above his receiver in that equipment rack. So it's all gone. The podcasting equipment is all destroyed, other than his laptop. So yeah, we are not starting this episode on a happy note. Very, very sad to have to say that, but we knew people would want to know the news. But like we say, all the people are okay. That is certainly the main thing. At the end of all this, everything else is stuff that can ultimately be repaired or replaced. Obviously, people's lives and well-being cannot. So he is thankful. We are thankful for that much, the safety of the people. But yeah, not a great time. So for the time being on AVRant going forward, I'll still be around. I've talked to Lee Overstreet. We had sort of intended to have a standing arrangement, as Lee is very often our pinch hitter and sitting in as guest co-host. This week, he's got things going on behind the scenes of his own. We had initially planned, Lee and I, to record, but a family member of his is not doing well. He is looking after them. So that is obviously more important, as important as home theater is. That is much more important. And so I am very, very thankful Joe stepped in here like Lee used to do on like 5 minutes notice. So it's remarkable, but thank you so much, Joe, for being here.
Happy to be a third stringer.
Just had to put it that way for sure. So I'll let everybody know this is going to be a strange episode aside from beginning it on a down note, which we try not to do very often. Aside from that, I'm going to be mixing up the order of things that we normally do things in because Joe is stepping in here on very short notice. He has a hard out this evening that we are going to hit, and there are some questions on this list tonight, and we have quite a few that I really, really want Joe's input on because there's stuff I'm very unsure of, and I want a clever home theater person like Joe to help me out and answer these questions, so we will work our way through them.
We'll see if we can find one.
Between the two of us, we'll come up with half. For whatever reason, there was a bunch of home theater news this week. I'm going to save that to the end of the podcast on this episode. Highly unusual for us, but I'm going to put all the news at the end because if Joe has to leave before we get to that, I can read some headlines and go through the news on my own. That's not really all that critical. I'd love to have a discussion if we do end up with time, but I kind of doubt it, so I'm going to save that for the end. Like I say, a little bit unusual running order. Everything is out of whack this week, but we are going to start off by letting you know we are AVRant. We are your home theater and AV questions answered. And to get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask. And you ask us by emailing us at question@avrant.com. That is our email address. It is by far the best way to reach us, and we answer all the questions that come in, first out. A wonderful organizational system that I'm actually able to keep track of. You can reach us in some other ways. You can come to our website, which is, of course, avrant.com. We have our show notes there. They include links to the products and articles that we talk about. There are links to our Flickr albums so that you can see the images that we're referring to. And then if you want to see those images as we're talking about them, come to youtube.com/avrant. You can see our recording sessions there. Pretty much just a couple of talking heads, but when there are images that we're referring to, you can see them in real time, and that is very handy sometimes. And you can also put a face to the name if you were wondering what the heck we look like and you've never checked out youtube.com/avrant before. You can also reach us individually. I am rob@avrant.com as far as email goes. Tom is tom@avrant.com, but do not be surprised if you do not get a response from him right now. It is obvious the reasons why that would be the case. Lee will be joining me for sure in the coming weeks, so I'll say that his email address is lee@avrant.com. We don't have a joe@avrant.com email address.
Gotta wait 10 years.
You got about 9 years to go, Joe,
yeah.
So just counting down the days. But yes, I can be found on social media. If I'm on a social media platform, my handle will be @FirstReflect. And Joe, where might people find you if they want to get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can find me on a number of the forums. It's JSKMDWK on AVS Forum, Kaleidoscape Owners Forum, eBay, wherever you want to find me.
Very good. And you know what? I even put that string of letters that there are no vowels in that, right? All the vowels taken out. I put that string of letters in the lower third if you're looking at the YouTube version, so it could be very handy. I didn't have that last time, but I came prepared tonight as far as that goes. Normally we hop into what we watch, but we're going to save that until we got 10 minutes before Joe has to leave because I think that's maybe the best usage of our time this week. But we can't start things off any other way than thanking our listeners of the week, who are people who support this podcast in some way. Now, more important than ever, if you go to avrant.com, you go over to the right-hand side on the desktop version, you'll see a image of a cup of coffee, and it'll say Support AVRant. And if you click on that, it'll take you to PayPal. You don't have to have a PayPal account. You can just use a credit card to give a donation. Look, I ain't taking none of that money for the next 2 years, all right? Everything that gets donated via our PayPal link to AVRant, that's all going to Tom and his family to help out. So, I've never set up a GoFundMe or anything. I don't know if I could even do that for Tom from Canada since he's in the States. I don't know what the rules are, but he already has a PayPal account. I was like, we already have a PayPal account. People already know this podcast. That's probably where you're hearing about it. And if you want to donate some funds to help out Tom and his family with everything that they're going through right now, they do have house insurance. Things will eventually get replaced and rebuilt, but heaven knows that, getting funds from insurance doesn't always come in the most timely manner when you might need some cash on hand right now to take care of some things. So if you're the generous type of person and you have the means, and if you don't have the means, do not worry. We are not like hand out expecting anybody to give donations. I just happen to know that there are people who are very kind-hearted and ask us outright, like, hey, how can I help? Can I give Tom some money in some way? And this is the way that it's going to reach him. And don't worry, none of it is coming to Rob H right now because I'm not in a catastrophe like Tom is, and I don't need those funds. So go to avrant.com and click on that support AVRant PayPal link if you'd like to send some funds directly to Tom to help him out. You can also support the podcast financially automatically every month by going to patreon.com/AVRantPodcast. And that is where you can sign up to make an automatic recurring monthly donation. So we have 134 patrons over there right now. And we thank you all very, very much for your financial support. Again, that money's all going to Tom right now. He's the one who needs it for sure. So thank you so much to everybody who's supporting Tom financially right now, because he could use it. He could use it. His family could use it. But yes, if you are not just donating cash, we still like to thank people who support the podcast in any such way. So Rohan, he sent in 3 movie codes. They are Movies Anywhere codes. They only work in the US, so Tom will get to check those out one day when he eventually has a house and a home theater back. That'll be something to look forward to. There were some fun movies in those 3 titles that Rohan sent in, and Peter did a similar thing. He sent in a movie code, actually for the movie Pearl that I've talked up so much, and Tom can check that out eventually. That is also a Movies Anywhere code, only redeemable in the US of A. But thank you, Rohan, and thank you, Peter, for sending in those lovely code donations for movies. And then, yes, there are people who are just voicing their support for us, giving us notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going in one way or another, whatever might be going on, and even more so right now, of course. So, yes, there are many people who wrote in a multitude of ways, expressing their concern for Tom, asking how he's doing. Hopefully this serves as a little bit of an update. If you check out Tom's Facebook page, that is where he is posting anything that he wants to share publicly. So that's the way to keep up with things if you'd like to check that out. I don't have like every name from every source. I didn't collect them all, and many of them were like screen names if they were on YouTube, so I don't know who that actually is. So I'm just going to list the people who I have their names from emails. So Sasi wrote in, and he kindly agreed to hold on to his Harmony Elite remote until Tom is ready for it. And Sasi agrees that it is strange how there is no reporting at all on that new Sofa Baton X2 touchscreen remote. He really would have liked to have seen a full report from Cedia from somebody. So yeah, I'm keeping an eye out too, Sasi, but thank you very much for holding on to that Harmony Elite for however long this might take. Tom's parents will definitely appreciate it. I'm betting their former Harmony remote probably didn't survive if it was sitting on a coffee table.
Yeah, they don't float so well.
No, not so much. Yes, we also got notes of gratitude from Rohan, Stefan, Gav, Ilango, Karl, Greg, Jorge, Gurinder, Fred, Vasanth, and Manuel. Manuel also a part of the 2 Hour Plus Club. So thank you all so much for those notes of gratitude. They're like more than ever appreciated right now, for sure. To everybody else who sent notes of support and gratitude via other means other than email, and I just didn't have the names handy, thank you all so much as well. I'm not leaving you out intentionally in any way. So a big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions. And with that, I'm going to skip over the news that we would normally start things off with, but we've got a couple of comments that I wanted to hit just before we get to the questions. So I've been talking a while. Joe, would you like to read a comment or two?
Let's start with Nathan. He was glad to hear Rob's description last week of nits versus lumens and ANSI lumens, as well as nits versus foot lamberts, plus Rob's suggestion to use Projector Central's projection calculator for whichever model of projector you have, and which numbers to look for when using that calculator. He did think it was worth adding a few more thoughts, though. First, even Projector Central's own estimated light output figures, as opposed to manufacturer specs, are based on measurements taken when the lamp or laser are brand new, and therefore at their brightest. They also tend to quote the light output with the manual iris fully open. In his experience with, say, a JVC lamp-based projector, the light output seems to drop off fairly rapidly at the beginning, down by as much as 25% by the 500-hour mark, and then it remains quite steady from there, but does gradually dim, so that by 2,000 to 3,000 hours, the lamp is half as bright as when it was brand new. In his experience with a laser-based projector so far, it also dims on a bit of a steeper curve right at the beginning, being down maybe 10% within the first 1,000 hours, but then being really stable after that, like still down the same 10% after 3,000 hours, and supposedly not getting to its half brightness until 20,000 hours of use. So Nathan thinks it's a good idea to build in a fudge factor when you're considering screen size for a given projector. Personally, he'd want any lamp-based projector to have 25% headroom, i.e., he'd like Projector Central's calculator to indicate that it can produce 125 nits for the given screen size rather than just barely hitting 100 nits when the lamp is brand new. Lastly, if you are bothered at all by fan noise, or if you simply want to avoid ever using high lamp mode in order to prolong your lamp's life as much as possible, then the fudge factor in another 30%, since this is typically how much light is lost by switching from high lamp mode to low lamp mode.
That all sounded very reasonable to me. I am pretty much in agreement with Nathan there. Joe, does that sound reasonable to you as
absolutely.
well?
And I've had numerous projectors. I've been in projector-based home theater systems for years. My JVC NX5, similar experience, did see some dimming, strong at first, and then, it lasted almost 4,000 hours before the warning lights were coming up and bulb was replaced. But I've also heard from many calibrators, don't have them come within the first 100 hours of use.
Oh yeah.
Wait for that kind of burn-in, break-in period for that bulb to really kind of get to a more stable point.
Yeah. So that is good points that Nathan sent in there, and we thank you for that. One thing I just did want to mention, in addition to that, I made a mention of the screen gain, which is another thing that you can enter as a value in Projector Central's projector calculator for any given model. So that is one thing to keep in mind, is that if you are saying, okay, by Projector Central's estimates, with the projector at the zoom range that I'm expecting to use for the screen size that I'm expecting to use, it's saying, it can hit like just barely 100 nits or something like that. And that is going to be brand new. So, Nathan's advice, factor in another 25-30%. Well, if you went to, say, a 1.3 gain screen, that would get you that extra 30% in return light from the screen versus the default, which is just a pure 1.0 gain screen. Conversely, though, if you're using many of the acoustically transparent screens, even though they're white, they're actually slightly less than 1.0 gain. They'll be a 0.8 or a 0.9 gain because the perforations or the weave that is
let light pass through.
Yeah, so there are some holes in that screen. It's not a completely solid screen, so that the sound can come through. That is lowering the gain in some cases. Or, of course, if you're using something like a gray screen, that's going to have a less than 1.0 gain. So that's another factor, and it's right there. It's part of the Projector Central calculator, but it's got its own little section down at the bottom. So you might not have thought to enter it where you're putting in like your screen size and your distance and which model of projector that you have, which are all at the top of the calculator. So that's just another thing you can put in there, and it can help you with that fudge factor, because you're like, I'm hitting 110 nits. That's not a full 25 to 30% extra headroom for when the lamp dims, but I'm going to be using a 1.2 gain screen, so now the numbers end up being fine. So
and I think that extra headroom in there is a good idea, because you never know with the screen. Is that the manufacturer's gain, or is that a measured gain? Right. And then, like even on my Stewart screen, that's a microperf, they suggest 10% less gain because it is microperf.
Yeah, and Stewart is really, really accurate with their specifications, but if it was a solid screen, it would be exactly whatever the gain is specified. But once you get to the microperforations, a little bit of light is lost because they went through those holes.
Right.
All right, you want to do Fred's as well?
Next comment, Fred recalled hearing us being a little bit skeptical when Walmart took over Vudu many years ago, and then we were skeptical again when Walmart sold off Vudu and it became Fandango at Home, now jointly owned by NBC Universal and Warner Brothers Discovery. The good news is that it still exists, and you can still just go to Vudu.com, even though the name and branding has changed now, and his whole Vudu library of titles he redeemed or purchased is still there. Furthermore, they still upgrade titles from time to time, like from an SD version to an HD version, or from the HDX to the 4K UHD. No extra charge, it just happens sometimes out of the blue.
Yeah, so that's some happy news there. If you have built yourself up a Vudu library, yeah, I don't think we've mentioned Vudu in quite a while on this podcast. So thank you, Fred, for writing in and letting us know it's still a pretty decent experience, even if it's not called officially Vudu anymore. Fandango at Home is the name. And yeah, anything owned by Warner Brothers Discovery these days, I don't know if it's long for this world, but maybe they just forgot about it and that's why it's still around. Yeah, so with that, why don't we go ahead and get into questions, because I want to get Joe's input on a bunch of these, and we'll see how many we can hit before he has to skedaddle this week. So yeah, I don't know. You want me to read this first one? You read the first one? What should
Go ahead.
I'll read the first one. We'll trade back and forth. So our first question is actually a leftover from last week, and not to worry, if this was time sensitive, I did send Gav a short email so that he could get going if he really wanted to, but this is worthy of discussion on the podcast for sure, and it might help some other folks. So Gav is in Melbourne, Australia. He was previously in Canberra, so he has moved. Gav has moved, but he is still within Australia, and he'll be setting up his home theater in his new living room. It's about 14 and a half feet wide, about 24 feet long, roughly. He intends to have the wall with the windows in the wall as his back wall. So he sent in a diagram that we'll be able to look at here in just a moment. So with that orientation, having the windowed wall as his back wall, yeah, there's going to be a permanent opening on the right side of the living room / home theater. That's to the entryway of the house. And he mentioned that the diagram he sent, it shows 2 openings with like a partial wall in between them, but he's like, flip that. There's a single opening in the middle, and then these partial walls that come in on either side on the right, but there's this permanent opening, no door, on the right-hand side that is open to the entry of the house, if you're looking at that diagram on YouTube or in our Flickr album. So he performed a very simple hand clap test in the new living room, and it clearly produced an echo. I don't know if that was before he had his furniture moved in. Right. That can make a big old difference as far as how bad that clap test sounds. But yeah, either way, even with some furniture in there, if it's like fully hardwood floor and that, it probably still has some residual zing that you can hear. If you just go into an empty room and you just sharply clap your hands, you can very often hear like a zing or a ring type of sound that comes after that clap, and ideally we wouldn't be hearing that. So he talked it over with his better half, and they've agreed that mounting some 4-inch thick acoustic panels on the walls is acceptable aesthetics wise. He's got the go ahead to put a couple of panels on the front wall, which is like the right side of the diagram, behind the main speakers, a panel on the back wall that would go in between the 2 windows, and a couple of panels on each side wall. That's what they've agreed would be aesthetically acceptable. So his first question, should he only worry about absorption panels? Will he need any other types of panels, or are just 4-inch thick absorption panels and nothing else an acceptable way to go? What's your feeling on that, Joe?
Yes.
Short and sweet. You are ready to go this week. As you've been hearing Tom and I say for quite a while, certainly your starting point, without question, is going to be bass traps. Bass traps are where you start. And pretty much any room that we're treating, take the square footage of all the surfaces in that room. So that's the 4 walls, the ceiling, and the floor. Total up the square footage of all of that. And we want about 10% of that total square footage covered in bass traps if we could. That's going to be our starting point. That will largely take care of the worst of any outright echoing or long reverberation decay times in just about any room. If you cover 10% of the total surface area in bass traps, and that is 4 inches or thicker for sure. If it's 4 inches, we'd love to have some air gap behind that in addition. 6 to 8 inches would be really, really nice if we're, talking about the total thickness of the panels from the wall surface. That is going to help you out in probably the most difficult range of frequencies, which is the crossover region between your speakers and your subwoofers. Lower than that, there's not much that passive treatments are really going to do. You're going to, treat anything to do with deep bass by having more than one subwoofer, ideally. But in that crossover region where you've got multiple sound sources and they aren't physically co-located, that can be a challenge, and getting bass trapping, passive bass trapping, nice thick bass trapping covering about 10% of your room is the way to address that, at least in Tom's and my experience. So many people will think of corner bass traps, particularly the vertical corners. A lot of people picture that. Panels that are straddling the vertical corners or triangular shaped super chunk type of things or tri-traps that are in there. That is an efficient way to cover a little bit of extra surface area and get a little bonus air gap in behind that panel that's straddling a corner. So it's like fewer panels can cover a little bit more surface area with that additional thickness thanks to the air gap behind them if you straddle a corner. And that goes for the corners between the wall and the ceiling or the corners between the wall and the floor. Those would work too. But it is not the only place you can put bass traps. Sometimes people think bass traps only go in the corners. It's just efficient. It's an efficient way to do it. It's quite often like out of the way. You're not necessarily going to be blocking a walkway or something like that. But don't worry if you're like, well, I can't treat all four corners equally. It doesn't have to be symmetrical at this stage. When we're talking about the 10% of bass traps, that doesn't have to be symmetrical. We're just trying to knock down the overall room reverberation and decay times, and it does a great job of that. And that is all just going to be absorption when you do that. I don't think in your case, with the number of panels that you talked about, that you're really going to be exceeding that sort of 10 to 15% total surface area range. So at that point, with the number of panels that you described, I wouldn't be doing anything other than absorption. So Joe's answer was much more concise, but
no, and I will chime in there. So
yeah.
This is labeled as a living room, dining room. I don't know if it's going to be intended as a dedicated theater, but yeah, I think that if you can treat the four vertical corners,
Sure.
It looks like that should work well in this room. The other thing I will chime in on is that it looks like the opening to that room is going to be kind of in that first reflection point. So I would make sure that you're treating very well what's opposite that opening, right? Because an open door is going to be 100% absorptive. It's not going to reflect at all. So you want to make sure that to give you acoustic balance in the room, that first reflection point is very well treated on the opposite side.
Very much agreed. Yeah. So if you end up with fewer panels on the right-hand side of this room because much of that is just an opening to another part of the house, it's perfectly fine for it to not be symmetrical in that way, that you actually have 3 or 4 panels over on the left side wall, and thick as you can, thick as you can manage, because you want to be absorbing as wide a range of frequencies as evenly as possible to even out the opening that's over there on the right-hand side. So he asks, where can he get some absorption panels, either locally or shipped to Melbourne from a different country if that's necessary? And yeah, finding stuff in Australia at a reasonable price, not necessarily the easiest thing. There are definitely panels, professionally made panels available to purchase, but they're like 600, 700 Australian dollars per panel. Completely unreasonable, honestly. For like, they're not magic about them, and a lot of them are like 2 inches thick, and it's absolutely ridiculous what some of these price points are. So I am by no means an expert on everything that's available in Australia, but I did at least find a website in Australia, which is just acoustictreatments.au, I think, .com.au. Is that what they go by there? Yeah, .com.au, just acoustictreatments.com.au. But they are selling, pretty standard absorption panels. They are 3 inches thick, 2 feet by 4 feet, so very standard, what we're used to seeing. And 3 inches thick, if you're able to mount that with a 1-inch air gap, that's every bit as good as a 4 inches of insulation. Because if the total thickness, if 1/4 of the total thickness is an air gap, it's almost identical in terms of absorptive response as if that was 4 inches of insulation being 3 inches plus a 1-inch air gap. So that's perfectly fine. Now, 145 Australian dollars for each of those panels. It sounds a bit outrageous because in North America, we're used to prices like $60 per panel type of thing. But compared to what it would cost you to import from somewhere else, or the other panels that I see being sold in Australia, that's a deal. Like, that's a not completely unreasonable price that they're charging there. They do also sell bass traps, which is quite literally just 2 of the 3-inch panels back to back. They're 6 inches thick, and they charge $300 for those because the shipping costs a bit more. So yeah, that is completely an option in terms of pre-made panels. Now, another one I did find, this is at eliteelectronics.com.au. These ones, they have 3-inch thick and 6-inch thick, and these are like 2 foot by 2 foot, so they're square in shape on the front. And you'll notice the price is like 57 Australian dollars for the 3-inch thick, 77 Australian dollars for the 6-inch thick, and that sounds pretty darn reasonable. And many of them are like trapezoidal shape and already designed to go right in the corner. These ones also all come with it's a thin piece of MDF with some slats or a pattern cut into it. It's really not a scatter plate. It's purely aesthetic. Don't try to think of that wood on top as actually being part of the acoustic treatment. It's really just there for aesthetic purposes. These are acoustic foam, and you've heard Tom and I talk about foam on the podcast before and how it isn't really at all the same thing as having insulation-based panels. But there is a type of acoustic foam that is not as effective as insulation. Please don't misconstrue what I'm about to say, but there is a type of acoustic foam that is not an utter waste to purchase, not utter garbage, like a bunch of the foam panels are out there, and that's what these are. This is the type of acoustic foam that does actually do some acoustic absorption. Ideally, you would be getting those 6-inch thick ones because they kind of equal a 2 inches of insulation. So like a 2-inch insulation panel is not bad for the vocal range. Those sidewall panels, that could be 2-inch insulation-based panels or 6-inch acoustic foam. The absorptive properties are fairly similar between those two things, despite the sizable difference in thickness. But because the price is reasonable and because aesthetics are a concern in this room, these are not a terrible choice if you just only want to go with pre-made panels. But I wouldn't really call them bass traps. Even the 6-inch thick ones, I wouldn't really call bass traps. So yeah, the other thing you could do is DIY, which is going to be the most reasonable way to go here. They have rigid rock wool that is available in basically 2 foot by 4 foot by 3.5 inch thick, very standard, what you would put inside 24 inch on center framing. A 5-pack of bats of that size goes for 195 Australian dollars, which is still kind of expensive. This is at Bunnings, which is widely available across Australia. It's kind of like their version of Home Depot over there. So that would be great ones to if you want to make like the simplest panels that use something as simple as corner bead for the framing, or just simple 1x4 lumber, right? Something inexpensive, not that sturdy a thing, but these panels are fairly rigid.
Yeah,
you might like you have something to say.
I agree 100%. If you can get the rock wool yourself, DIY is the way to go.
Yeah.
I made all the acoustic treatments in my theater, and we used what's called finger jointed pine, FJP wood. You can get that at Home Depot locally. It's nice and straight. It's got nice edges to it. But I mean, it's not a lot of work to build a frame that fits exactly over that 2x4 panel.
Yeah.
Put a French pleat on the back of it, wrap it in speaker cloth, Guilford of Maine, whatever you're going to use, and hang those up. And it's one, you've built part of your own theater. Two, they work as well as anything else you can buy, and you're going to save money.
Yes, you would definitely do that. If you are just have no idea where to purchase acoustically transparent fabric that would be suitable for wrapping your own DIY panels, that acoustictreatments.com.au that I mentioned, they sell fabric by the meter. So that is a place, the same fabric that they use on their own panels that's acoustically transparent and at not unreasonable prices either. So one other thing I'll mention is they do have at Bunnings earth wool, which is actually just fiberglass insulation. It's basically the pink stuff, but a different color and treated a little bit differently. A 10-pack bat of those that would also be like basically 2 feet by 4 feet by 3.5 inches thick, 129 Australian dollars for a 10-pack. So it's twice as many bats of the same size of insulation at a lower price. But this is not rigid on its own. This will sag over time if you just put it inside of a loose frame. So this one needs a little bit more support to it if you're going to be making DIY panels out of this, but still completely reasonable to use. And if you're doing something like making super chunks, which is literally just cutting triangles out of it and stacking that in your corners, this could work really, really well for that. You put in like kind of a little shelf attached to your wall every 4 feet or so as you're going up the wall, or 3 feet or whatever, makes sense to not have this compressing on itself. And this would reduce the price and be very easy to work with. So yeah, those are the suggestions that I would have for what to look for in Australia right now.
And I'll throw out one other. Most of the HVAC supply places will sell something either duct liner or Lin Acoustic, which I think is made by James Hardy, which I see in one of those links. And you can use that also. My front wall is treated with 2 inches of Lin Acoustic over the entire front wall.
Okay.
So that's another thing. And it's something you can attach right to the wall and then just build panels over that also to hide it.
Right. So I think you'll be in good stead. I think between those resources, you'll find something that'll work for you in this room. So he did mention that what he's intending to have is his back wall. It has 2 windows in it. So there's kind of like a little section of wall that's right in the middle of the back wall and then a window on either side of that. So he's like, they're honestly never used, which I'm like, really? In a living/dining room area? Maybe this is a pretty darn dedicated home theater space there. But yeah, they say those windows are really never used. They got blackout curtains over them that they pretty much never move those curtains, which again, I find amazing for a living room setup, but that's what he said is the situation. So he's like, could he just fill up the window bays with bats of insulation? Because if they're going to be hidden behind the blackout curtains, then they're never going to see them. And that could be some hidden, acoustic insulation back there. So what do you think of that idea, Joe?
Yes.
Yeah. Look at those answers.
Get paid by the word. So yes, you could fill up the window bays. Some things I'd be concerned about there. One, you don't want moisture or mildew or anything like that. I don't know if that's a problem in the part of Australia you're in or not. So I would at least encourage you to put something that you can take in and out or would maybe allow some minor amount of airflow.
Yeah.
I've also treated the windows in our theater with a vinyl blackout that attaches right to the glass with Velcro.
So that the people on the outside aren't seeing a stack of insulation from outside the house. Yeah.
Vinyl. It doesn't look like anything when you're looking into it. But you could do that and then put in, if you had the rigid rock wool or fiberglass, made a panel, wrapped it in cloth, put it right in that spot. It'd be easy to take in and out if you ever needed to. Yeah. Plus, I don't know what kind of fire code issues. It looks like you only have one entrance into the room. Sometimes those windows count as exits. So you want something that you can take out easily.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, if it is just bats of insulation, that is very lightweight and easy to move out of the way. One thing I would suggest, if they're like, of course, there's the scenario where someone fills up their window wells and kind of forgets about it, and then they come back and there was condensation that built up behind those bats of insulation on the windows, and now you've got some rot in your windowsills and leads to all kinds of problems. So if there's a chance that you're kind of going to forget about moving things out of there and inspecting the windows for any moisture that might have built up for a while, just make sure that you can have airflow that goes around those bats of insulation. So don't pack full the window well bays. That's not necessary for acoustic purposes. It's not like it has to be stuffed full and really, really tight in there at all. And one thing I might actually suggest is like get a little platform that has some legs on it and put that on the bottom first and then stack some bats of insulation on top of that and then leave a gap at the top as well. Because what we really want is the air to be able to make it from top down or bottom up, depending on which way the ventilation is going. You want that airflow to be able to circulate around vertically because that's the way it tends to move, just due to, whatever side is hotter, right? The air is going to either fall or rise based on what the temperature is doing right now. So you want to be able to have that vertical movement of air across the window and around that insulation. So yeah, just a little platform with some legs, and now you got airflow around those bats of insulation. Much less likely to have any condensation problems.
Agreed.
Cool. So I think that was that one. You want to read the next question, Joe?
So new for this week, first question comes from Mohsen. What's our opinion on having a professional video calibration done remotely? Can it make a big difference and be a worthwhile investment if the calibrator does not physically come to your house?
I really wanted Joe's input on this one because I have thoughts, but I didn't want to be the only one giving thoughts on this particular one. So yeah, Joe, what do you think on this one?
And I've had professional calibrators come twice to the house. Once with a Sony projector, and then my current JVC NX9, I had Chris Deering come out and do the calibration, and it was impressive. We spent almost a whole morning doing that. As far as remote calibration, I'm not sure if he's referring to sending your projector to someone remotely and having them calibrate it, which I think can work 90+% of the way of them coming out to you. Or if you're saying they're going to calibrate your projector in your room with what device? What are they looking at? What monitors or measurement tools are they using to try and calibrate that? I know you can do acoustic remote calibration if someone's just moving a microphone around, right? That's something doable. But I'm really curious because when Chris came out, he brought $30,000
exactly
light meters and colorimeters and spectral analysis tools that. Yeah, he's not just going to send that to you to move around yourself in your room. So, and then also just, the physical aspect of them having them here in the room. One, they can adjust things physically, right? Whether it's the mount, whether it's the calibration of the angle of the projector, pitch, yaw, all that kind of stuff. And then also there's just no replacement for having eyeballs on screen. And then he was also able to help make sure the settings on all my other gear were, we set the Apple TV to always stay on and output just the right way. We set the Kaleidoscope to be doing just exactly what we wanted it to. So that was, again, something he could do here. Yeah, which he could probably walk me through remotely also, but it was easier to have him on site.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, my preference would be very clearly to have the person actually physically come to your place for any professional calibration. That would be the number one choice. But of course, that isn't always the most viable thing for a lot of people. I completely understand that. What I definitely don't want to see anybody pay for is I am going to get onto a video chat with you and through that eyeball your settings and have you hold a remote in your hand and go through the user settings and I tell you what to set the color and contrast and brightness to. That is junk. That is not worth any amount of money. That's not doing you any favors. And I've seen sort of people offering that type of service. So if that's what you're talking about, don't do that. There are other forms of legitimate remote calibration, but yeah, it's questionable how good it's going to be because there is the type where via shipping, via a courier, they do send you a meter because there has to be a meter involved. There has to be a light meter involved. Now, there are enthusiasts who own their own meter, and some of them have spent tens of thousands of dollars on a absolutely professional grade meter, and that would be one way to do it, but I don't think that's the case with Mohsen in this scenario. The most frequent ones that I've seen of people doing that, they're sending something like a Portrait Display's C6 meter, which is a nice enthusiast meter to use. If you're just buying Calman home and you're getting a bundle from Portrait Displays and you're getting their C6 meter and you want to do some enthusiast level calibration of your own display, it's a great meter. It's preset for all types of different displays and that. But for a professional calibrator to be charging professional calibrator type of money for a single calibration session. Obviously, one of the reasons that some of them choose to send a meter like that is because it costs a lot less. So if it does get damaged in shipping or something like that, they're not out tens of thousands of dollars. They're out a couple $100. And then, it's simple for any user on the other end to it's a USB plug into their laptop. And, it's the simplicity. It's a small, light device. It's easy to ship. And if it were to get damaged, not a giant loss. I'm not going to say that it's certainly not anywhere close to the worthlessness of the person who's just telling you user settings over the phone. It's much, much better than that. But if you're paying a similar price to what it would cost to have someone come out in person and use a professional grade meter that costs tens of thousands of dollars, I don't think you're getting the same value there. But I've seen that offered, and it's better than the worst of it for sure. It's not as good as the best of it. It's falling in between. I don't think I've come across too many who are sending a tens of thousands of dollar meter in the mail for you to use that. You're not going to find that. So the other one that I've seen is basically you grant a calibrator remote access to your laptop, which is always a bit of a dodgy thing to do. But instead of them instructing you on what buttons to click, they just take control of your laptop. Again, a meter has to be involved in some way, and it's probably going to be something like a C6 because that's the most easiest thing to do. But it's that type of thing. So, a lot of it depends on what type of price are they charging? How much time are they willing to spend? Because if they're having to walk you through clicking the buttons, that takes 3 times longer than them doing it themselves. Or if they're doing it inside an hour or two, you're not actually getting a full calibration. There's no way you could remotely instruct someone on the other end of a video chat to do a professional level calibration in 2 hours. It's just not going to happen if that person doesn't have experience doing it.
Yeah, so a couple other things. Mohsen wasn't clear if he was talking about a projector or a flat panel display, so we're not sure about that.
In his theater, he has an ultra short throw projector at the moment, but this could be something else.
And then, I'll say that there are a lot of decent discs out there that you can buy and do this yourself.
Sure.
Depending on what you're looking at investing in the calibrator, you might want to try it yourself first. I know there are some projectors out there that offer calibration. So like the JVCs used to be able to work with the Spider X. So there's ways you can do it yourself. Depends on how much time you want to put into it.
Money-wise, if you were to take the money you were going to spend on a remote calibration and just get CalMan home with a C6 meter bundle, I would probably, if you have the time to invest in doing it yourself.
And willing to watch a lot of YouTube.
Yeah. But, that is probably for an enthusiast more fun, honestly. Now, I did want to flip it a little bit, and Joe mentioned this in passing there when we got started on this. What if we are talking about an audio calibration? What if we are talking about a remote audio calibration instead of someone coming to your house with their microphone set up to do a professional audio calibration? What do we feel on that one?
Yeah, I think that is a much more reasonable thing to do. You can get a UMic 1 for $100, whatever it is. Plug that into a laptop, do a Skype call with somebody, and they could help set up whatever device it is you're using, whether it's your receiver or some other outboard equalization box, subwoofer alignment, something like that. And I know there are vendors out there that provide that service, and I think that's much more reasonable. Makes a lot more sense. You'll see that even all the way up to the very high end. I know that Anthony Romani offers that service, where he can have a technician with a mic that he's walking through, and it doesn't matter whose hands are moving it. It's looking at the results on a computer and knowing how to interpret and use that information to improve the performance.
Yeah, and of course, hopefully. This is a little bit of the vetting, right? Because if this is somebody you've never worked before, if they are not instructing you well beforehand, here's the USB microphone that we would like you to use, or maybe they send you one, because sending a UMic 1 in the mail wouldn't be that great of a risk for someone to do that if they do that. But if they're not instructing you on, here's a handful of microphone stands with boom arms that we recommend for doing this, if they're not giving you that sort of information beforehand, I might try to find somebody else, because they should be preparing you for the, minimal amount of equipment that you need to invest to be able to do an audio calibration properly, because you don't want to actually be holding the microphone in your hand and moving around while they're doing that. That would not be proper procedure. And if that's what they're recommending, walk away.
And you can get that boom mic on Amazon for $20.
Exactly.
It's very reasonable.
It's not a big investment there. But similar things, sometimes they'll do it where they want to take remote control of your laptop so that they can just breeze through it using whatever software they're used to using, or sometimes they'll walk you through it on a video call, that type of thing. So, I'd ask those sorts of questions, what's involved, because you want to factor that into the price that they're charging.
Right. And if they've already gone through the steep learning curve of learning something like mini DSP and you've never used it before, it makes sense for them to take that, use their expertise, and get the most out of your system.
Yeah. There we go. I think that was a pretty reasonable answer. Hopefully that got you some guidance on where you should go with that. So let's see. Oh, I never feel right reading Infinite Gary's questions with his guests. It's got to be. I didn't order these first in, first out. That's the way it went.
Okay. So Infinite Gary says, last week Matthew Pose from Pose Acoustics posted a video in which he answers a viewer's question about potentially using sealed and ported subwoofers together. At first he responds that it is possible, but that it is challenging. But then he expands upon the subject to explain why. If he owned a speaker company, he would only make sealed subs and speakers. And he says he currently only uses sealed subs on high-end theaters he designs and installs today. He points out the challenges in getting great infrasonic bass response, and how if you use ported subs, you inevitably get port resonances. And in the sort of theaters he is building, the subs are being pushed hard enough, since he wants that good infrasonic response, that the port noise are audible as honking or port chuffing, or otherwise unpleasant sounds. And he'd need to spec ported subwoofers with at least 9 dB of unused headroom. So it's just easier to avoid all of that by only ever using sealed subs. Gary's been using ported subs for a long time now. He's never, ever heard any port chuffing or a honking sound, and he does have sealed subs in his Infinite Baffle sub for comparison. So what's the deal?
So my first thought is, I've seen some images of Gary's rooms in his house. He has multiple rooms with audio setups in them. None of them are terribly large rooms. And the types of subwoofers that Gary has, you got more than 9 decibels of headroom, Gary. That's Matthew Pose wouldn't have any problem in your room sizes using the ported subs that you have, because you're never getting close to where the port is going to start making unpleasant noises with the type of headroom that you have available. So I mean, I've heard what Matthew Pose was talking about in that video. I've heard port noise. It absolutely can happen, even on fantastic subwoofers that are DSP controlled like SVSs and monoliths. If you're really right up to the edge of what they can do, or particularly if you're applying a liberal amount of equalization and processing to those subwoofers to really keep them linear, or in fact have them rising in response as you're going lower and lower in frequency. When you have a ported subwoofer, there is a tuning to that port. There's a natural resonant frequency of that port, and it's a bell curve around that center resonant frequency. On either side of it, that port is still amplifying the sound that the driver is initially producing, but it falls off to either side of that resonant frequency of the port itself, which is just determined by the length and diameter of the port. That's what determines the tuning frequency, as well as to some extent the internal volume of the cabinet of the subwoofer itself. But those things determine the tuning resonant frequency, and then you got this bell curve around that center frequency that the port is also contributing output to. So in Matthew Pose's case, this little bit of obsession with infrasonic bass that Tom and I don't agree with, it does pose a challenge, because let's say the tuning of the port is something honestly very reasonable, like 25 hertz. Right, because if you've tuned the port to be resonant at 25 hertz, that's the frequency at which the port is maximizing the sound pressure level that's being generated from the port itself, then at 20 hertz, you're still going to have a sizable amount of contribution coming out of the port because of that bell curve around the center frequency of 25 hertz. But if you're trying to keep that subwoofer linear in output, or in fact rising in output down to 10 hertz, well, now you're going to be driving that port like mad. You know, you're going beyond the natural capabilities of that port resonance.
Yeah, and going back to, I've worked for speaker manufacturers in the past. I did car audio for years and years when I was younger. I've heard port chuffing, noise, turbulence, especially if it depends on if you're using a flared port or rounded port, or if you're just taking a piece of PVC and shoving it in a box. you got to remember that porting of subwoofers was originally done to gain efficiency, right?
Yeah.
It used to be subwoofers couldn't handle 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 watts, that they were not huge magnets on these things. They didn't have a tremendous amount of linear excursion to them. So you could get more output by porting them and turning that box into a musical instrument that was being played by the subwoofer, in effect, right? You want to hear port chuffing? Put a 9 dB gain below the tuning frequency, right? You'll hear port chuffing then for sure.
Yeah.
I agree with Matthew that seal box is more predictable, better power handling, more linear. They'll go lower. So there's, I think, benefits to that approach.
There is, though, no free lunch in this stuff. If you use nothing but sealed subwoofers, then to get that level of sound pressure level output down to 20 hertz, and in Matthew's case, lower, like a full octave lower than that, you need some big, massive excursion drivers. I mean, you are trying to displace the air, and you have no resonance to help you anymore in that sheer movement of air output. That's all you're using, is just like outright mechanical displacement. That's all it is. So price goes up, right?
There's no replacement for displacement. We know this.
That's right. And also, if you are driving a sealed subwoofer very close to its limits, like it's getting close to physically bottoming out, right? Like it's reaching the limits of its excursion. It can't physically go any farther in and out. You start to get a higher percentage distortion out of a sealed sub than you might out of some ported subwoofers.
Yeah,
I mean, we've seen some of that measurement.
All the subwoofers, you can't hear 10% distortion. I mean, it's just your ears aren't ready for it.
That's the thing. But then on the flip side, if you aren't trying to use a ported subwoofer to output frequencies well below its port tuning, if you're willing to have that rumble filter on it and be like, hey, I'm going to have pretty close to a mountainous drop off below 19 hertz or something like that, then the chances of you running into that really disagreeable port noise, you've chopped that right off. You can. The port chuffing is pretty obvious when it happens. It's not like I'm detecting a tiny little bit of error in the sound. Like, no, it's making a farty noise. Like that's what's going on. It's kind of easy to tell. So yeah, I don't think there's any disagreement here. But I think there's a little bit of difference in priority because like Tom and I, we worry about 20 hertz extension, and Tom and I don't worry about lower than that. Because look, there's nobody who's going to argue that your ears are hearing what is literally called infrasonic frequencies, below audible frequencies. That's below 20 hertz. Your ears are not what's involved there. There are the people who will argue that you get a physical sensation, and I personally think that's a little bit debatable. I think we're still mostly talking about the harmonics that are coming from there. But what is undeniable is if you are actually producing bass sound waves that long, very similar to how we can't see infrared light, but we can see the effect of infrared light on visible light in the form of heat waves, right? You get a similar effect from producing infrasonic frequencies has an audible effect on audible frequencies. It's like the heat wave version of sound. That's what's going on. You get some of that ripple effect that makes its way up into the audible frequencies, and some people really, really love that. Personally, I think if it was like in the recording itself, I'm willing to just deal with the harmonics and forget about the fundamental that my ears can't hear. Or if I'm really worried about experiencing that physical sensation, I'll put in a butt kicker. I'll put in a tactile transducer that can go down to 1 hertz.
Yeah, so I would say, Matthew Pose he's dealing with the, Ascendos and the per listen,
Yes.
and a very, elevated level of product that he's calibrating theaters for.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know. I think we tread that line pretty well. I don't think there's any disagreement going on, but hopefully that sort of clarifies because Gary is wondering what's he talking about.
Right.
Okay. Oh, that was all from Infinite Gary this week. I'm not used to that. That means I can get on to Stefan's question. So Stefan appreciated our advice from last week, and he's pretty sure he will go with the RBH Impression Series on-wall speakers that we suggested as our top pick for him. He likes that they have a very slim depth at only 3.7 inches, and their price points are exactly the range he was looking for. But to get a little bit more granular, his room is about 15 feet wide, about 17 feet long. Which models exactly, and there are 4 of them to choose from, which would we recommend most highly out of that RBH Impression Series lineup? So basically what you've got are 2 models that are a tweeter and a single woofer. So that's the 5IW for wall-mounted, I for impression, or the 5IWR, which is Impression Series wall-mounted reference. And the difference there is they changed the tweeter. The reference version ones are a folded ribbon tweeter. And with that folded ribbon tweeter comes a little bit higher output capability and a little bit higher power handling. But other than that, the cabinet stays the same. And as far as I know, the woofer stays the same too. True phase plug in those, because RBH does that type of thing. Not just a dust cap that looks like a phase plug. The other models are simply 2 of the 5 1/4 inch woofers on either side of the tweeter. So you have the same fabric dome tweeter choice in the 55 IW impression wall mounted, or the 55 IWR for reference gets you the folded ribbon tweeters. So with the sort of distances that you're experiencing in 15 feet wide, 17 feet long, I mean, any of these would work. There's not really anything holding you back here. However, my experience with, I don't know if these are the exact same folded ribbon tweeters that RBH used to use in previous models, because their designers have put out some videos where they're like, yeah, these are pretty close to the old, the SX reference series at like maybe a quarter of the price of what that series used to be. So the cabinets aren't as fancy, and the output capability isn't as high as that former series. But their claim is that the sound quality just at a slightly lower volume level is pretty darn similar. And RBH is usually pretty straight up with those types of things. So I don't know, Joe. Do you have a strong feeling that he should choose any of these 4 models particularly?
I like the idea of using the dual woofers maybe in the front 3 speakers, and then the single woofer for your surrounds just because you're going to be sitting that much closer to them. And also, I understand why we're recommending a brand new product, but man, I'd also look at the used market out there. There are so many speakers from Sonance, Speakercraft, Paradigm that, look on eBay, AVS Forum, Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace that, there's a lot of other things out there. Of course, the chance that you run into a risk of buying used is, obviously there's no warranty. Right. You don't know how they were treated before, those kind of things. But you might also save yourself a ton of money.
So the only thing I'll say lastly, when it comes to your choice of the front speakers, I agree. I'd probably go for the dual 5-inch woofers regardless. But in terms of the choice of which tweeter to go with and therefore the sort of power handling and maximum output that you have, depends a little bit on that seating distance. So basically, if you total up the numbers, the ones that have the folded ribbon tweeter with the dual 5.25-inch woofers on either side of that, they're good to a 4-meter distance. You want to hit reference volume at home from a 4-meter distance, so basically 12, 13 feet, that type of thing. Those would be the ones to go for. If you go with the Silk Dome tweeter version, they do have a little bit less headroom in terms of output, a little bit lower power handling. They're really good to like a 3-meter distance, like 10 feet. That type of thing. So with 17-foot long room, you might be, 12, 13 feet away. That's entirely conceivable. So if that's the case, I would lean towards the folded ribbon tweeter versions, which do cost more for sure. And, if you're talking about the 5 main speakers, your front, left, right, center, and your 2 surround speakers, I'd want the tweeters to match personally.
Agreed.
I can hear enough of a timbre mismatch if the side surround speakers are, clearly a different tweeter from the front 3 speakers. I wouldn't care so much about surround backs, front heights, that type of thing. I'm not that worried. If it's like, I can't afford to get 7 of these, but I could if I had the dome tweeters in the back and then I had ribbon tweeters for the other 5. Like I would take that deal all day long, personally. I'm not that worried about the critical timbre matching behind me. In my experience, I just haven't been able to notice that big of a difference coming from my surround back speakers and the limited usage that they honestly have in movies. Yeah, that's my feeling there. He had another question, didn't he? I will keep going. So he found some photos of someone else's home theater that has the aesthetic he would like to achieve. It appears to be fabric-covered walls with blacked out front wall and ceiling, and then gray side walls that actually have like LED light strips that are running vertically right where the fabric panels have their seams. So they've kind of integrated the lighting of this room into the fabric side wall panels. But he also found an image of what's hiding behind all of the fabric, and it appears that this person has essentially covered every surface, like predominantly with insulation, and it doesn't appear to be particularly thick insulation because there's like scraps that are on the floor present in the photo, and it basically looks like 1 inch thick, rigid fiberglass insulation. It looks like Owens Corning, right? Just going by the color there. So then there are some like cone-shaped diffusion panels, I guess, not particularly deep. It's like 1.5 inches, 2 inches at most, I think. And they're just pyramids, so they're not even like mathematically calculated shape. And like we talked about a week or 2 ago, it's really only going to be affecting about 7,000 hertz.
Yeah, this room's got to be just suck all the life out of above 7K.
Yeah, so
every square. Even the projector box, everything seems like it's covered in this same 1 inch fiber. And I can't tell. Maybe that fiberglass. Maybe there's 4 or 5 layers of it deep. I don't think so, but.
It sure doesn't look like it because, those pyramid panels, so-called diffusion panels, there's no hiding the depth of those.
Right.
And, the insulation is not protruding past those by any measure. So he's like, would it be a good idea to copy that design? Like 1 inch thick Owens Corning insulation?
It's too much coverage. No, don't do this. This is not going to sound good. This might sound good for a padded cell room, but this is not going to sound good for your theater.
Yeah, strictly in terms of talking, like if this was just a meeting room and you want to have it not be an echoey room for talking in, maybe it's not the worst for that. But for a home theater, no way. Neither Joe or I or Tom would say that this is the way to do it.
Yeah, you want to cover maybe 30% of your surface area with this kind of a material behind that.
But thicker.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Basically what this is doing is it's absorbing, and I mean, I don't think the diffusion is doing anything. They put it, like anything honestly beneficial. But all that's happening in this room is your treble is being completely cut down.
Yeah, you're going to blow your tweeters.
Yeah, you are completely cutting down the treble and then doing almost nothing else to the rest of the frequency range. That's what this type of treatment would be doing. So this is a really, really dead, lifeless sounding room, but without the benefits of having fixed anything in your crossover region or even your mid-range, honestly. This is, there's going to be a very uneven sounding room when it comes to decay times. You're going to have 0 millisecond decay times in your high treble, but then still lengthy decay times in your mid bass and your bass. That is absolutely not what I would copy. So absolutely nothing wrong with the fabric covered walls, right? I mean, we like that idea. You've done some stuff like that, haven't you, Joe, yourself?
Yeah, some of the early rooms that we did, previous employers we worked with, guys who worked with Owens Corning and did all room treatments, a company called ASR that became part of Cinematech, I believe. And these, they had a very different type of panel, but they treated everything, but most of what they were using to treat was a fiberglass that had a type of drywall on the front of it, very thin, and that was actually working as a base absorber because they would put very long screws on it that fiberglass could compress minimally.
It's like a membrane.
Right, and then they would use the same panel and flip it the other way and cover maybe that 30%, especially at the reflection points, for that, but it was, at least 2 inches, if not thicker. That was... Fabric treatment is a great way to hide all of that. You can hide your speakers. Behind that, you can hide all your acoustic treatments, and it leaves you a very nice, clean-looking room.
It sure does.
It's just you don't need to overdo with what he's in this particular example.
With what's behind the fabric, because I mean, you can have patches of bare untreated wall that is still behind the same fabric. The stretched fabric is going to make the look all uniform, and then behind it can be, optimally set up. Also, I love the idea that you can have your wires all run back there without actually having to worry about, what if I need to change a wire back there? You don't have to drill new holes in the drywall. All of it can be done behind the fabric that could be removed. So there's multiple different stretched fabric systems, some of them way more costly than I think they should be because they're basically pieces of plastic that hold fabric on your wall, and they're charging, hundreds of dollars per foot for the stuff, and I don't think that makes any sense. But I mean, it can be quite simple. You can just do stick wood framing that, it's not supporting any weight, and you can just staple your fabric or otherwise secure it, brad nail your fabric. I mean, it can be quite simple and cost effective.
I think the advantage with systems like this, it's easier to get it even, easier to take up and down if you need to. It's a more clean, polished, finished look when you're done with it. Go and take a look at the coverage that was done of Soundroom 10 at CEDIA 2023. Okay. And you can see what they did behind the stretch fabric that was put up on the walls. You can see where they put a reasonable amount of absorption, where they put a reasonable amount of diffusion, and had bare wall as part of that also. Yeah. But that was the Anthony Grimani room from not this year, but the previous year.
Okay. Yep. And don't cover everything in 1 inch. So no way. No bueno.
Okay, let me read John's question. John is having a lip sync issue. He's using a JBL Synthesis 16-channel SDP58 Pre-Pro, which supports all the latest HDMI 2.1 and immersive audio features. It uses Dirac Live for room correction. He also has a NAD VR NV Extreme external video processor, and his projector is the former flagship JVC NZ9. He only uses 2 sources devices, a Kaleidoscope and an Apple TV 4K. John, I like all your gear. Yeah. The Kaleidoscope has no issue at all. Lip sync on everything he plays from his Kaleidoscope seems perfect. But his Apple TV 4K is all over the place. The Apple TV Plus app is off by a little bit, but at least it's consistent, so he can adjust for that. With Netflix and Amazon Prime Video, he can fiddle with the lip sync control that's present in his JBL Synthesis Pre-Pro and eventually get it to look acceptable, but it's only on a case-by-case basis, which is obviously frustrating and annoying. But then if he tries to stream a live TV channel via YouTube TV or any other their apps, like any of the 24-hour news networks, for example, lip sync is way off, so much so that he cannot even adjust it using the maximum range of his JBL's lip sync setting. He has lots of friends over all the time. It's embarrassing to him to have all of this high-end equipment and then lip sync looks so much worse than just a simple TV setup. And he's fiddling away with settings and still can't get it perfect. He's looked up recommended setting changes for the Apple TV 4K and tried everything, but nothing seems to work. Do you have an idea for how to resolve this? First, let me tell you, John, lip sync can be a real challenge, as we went through last week here on the show. But you're talking about the difference between the Kaleidoscape, which is a known entity with a local storage of the files that you're playing back, versus streaming, right? Yeah. And the challenge with streaming is there's not the consistency. You're using 4 or 5 different apps that you've talked about. Mm-hmm. You've got some local programming. You've got some that's pre-recorded. So yeah, there's all kinds of delays and challenges with that. So I'm not surprised that you're running into these issues. Combine that with the fact that you have a pretty powerful video processor in line with that, which can contribute to some of those challenges depending on how much work it's needing to do. Mm-hmm. I can see why one's giving you trouble and one's not. Yeah,
you're feeding the output of the Apple TV 4K, which itself has some variability in the settings that you can say is just coming out of the Apple TV 4K. It's then going through 3 different things that can all process the video, right? It's going through the Pre-Pro, the JBL Synthesis Pre-Pro, that can process the video signal. It's going through a MAD VR, that can obviously process the video. And then the JVC can also process the video. And I suspect, HDMI has a lip sync feature built right into it. That's one of the supposed features of HDMI. It wouldn't surprise me if basically the Apple TV 4K is seeing those 3 upstream video processing things, and 1 or 2 or all 3 of them has that HDMI lip sync setting also turned on, and it has no idea which one to clock to. Something along those lines, which is why sometimes in scenarios like this, and you've probably come across this advice, you said you looked up a bunch of things and tried everything, but just in case it wasn't suggested, go through all of your devices, potentially even the Kaleidoscape, because sometimes HDMI does weird, stupid things. Like if there's one item anywhere in the signal chain, it just listens to that and ignores the settings and everything else. But turn that HDMI lip sync feature off unintuitively. Turn it off in everything that you possibly can. Because sometimes when it's trying to look downstream at what it's feeding its signal to with that HDMI lip sync feature turned on, like I say, with 3 different video processors in the chain, it might be getting lost in what it's trying to clock itself to. So I would at least try turning it on, and not just in the Apple TV 4K, in all of the devices, including the projector itself. I would also, if this hasn't been done, because it causes way more problems than it should, make sure you check the chroma setting in the Apple TV 4K itself and set it to 420. Which I know is not the highest number. Like, why wouldn't I choose the highest number that's available when 422 and 444 are sitting right there? But 420 is what is coming in from any of the streaming services. If you set the Apple TV 4K to output anything other than 420, it's trying to do some video processing before it sends the signal out. Whereas if you just set it to 420, it's just passing along what it downloaded as it's streaming along there. And that 420 chroma setting messes things up that it shouldn't. It happens quite frequently. So if you hadn't come across those suggestions, I would do that.
And I'll throw in 2 more. One, if the Kaleidoscape always works, only use the Kaleidoscape when your friends come over. Don't tell them to watch Apple TV at all. That solves your problem. But also, basic troubleshooting. Let's start simplifying the system and eliminating things, right?
Yeah,
take the MAD VR out of the signal chain if you can for a little while, and just run the Apple TV, through the Pre-Pro and straight into the display, and just see if that takes care of the problem, makes it better or worse, if you can notice any difference. Again, it comes down to the fact that you don't have the same level of consistency off of a pre-recorded, streamed program as something that's local.
So the only other thing I was going to suggest that you might get around to is, because I don't think that JVC NZ9 has an audio return channel as part of it. I might be wrong about that, but
HDMI 1 and HDMI 2 inputs, I don't think it's got any audio on it.
I don't recall it having it. There's a possibility we're wrong, but I don't think it's true. So what I'm getting at is the idea of plugging the Apple TV 4K directly into the projector and then using an audio return channel back to the Pre-Pro. That almost certainly isn't going to work. But what you might end up finding is that if the only way to eliminate this very annoying lip sync issue is to more or less have a direct video connection from the Apple TV 4K straight to the projector, because that might be what gets this working as far as the lip sync, is not having the video output of the Apple TV 4K going through the JBL Synthesis Pre-Pro and the MAD VR, that video signal just goes straight to the projector, but then you need to be able to feed the audio separately to the Pre-Pro. So
HDMI splitter.
An HDMI audio splitter, audio extractor. It's not out of the realm of possibility that ends up being the solution. But you can troubleshoot before that to determine if I go ahead and plug the well, I guess you wouldn't be able to tell if you plugged it straight into the projector. You have no audio if you're doing things that way. So that's a suggestion I can throw out there, that having that HDMI splitter might be what helps you. And you need one with EDID management, because now it'll have two EDIDs to deal with. You have the projector's EDID for the video, and you have the Pre-Pro's EDID for the audio. So you would need an HDMI splitter with EDID management. Fun stuff. More headaches potentially, but that might be the fix.
And John, I just want to share, I sympathize with you completely.
Yeah.
You spend a ton of money, you buy really good gear, it should work kick-ass, and it just causes first world problems, right? So I've been there, done that.
So since there are some images I want to show as we're going along here, would you mind reading this next question? It'll help me stay organized over here on the production side of things.
No problem. Sasi wanted to begin by fully admitting he is well into the weeds with his questions this week, and it's more of an academic curiosity than a genuine concern of his. Don't worry, I ask questions like that all the time.
Yeah.
But there's a certain faction of commenters online who are very concerned with step response measurements of any speaker that uses more than one driver. He's seen this group of people criticize the KEF R Series Meta speakers, which Sasi thinks sound really excellent for having, quote, poor time alignment, especially when it comes to the bass drivers versus the Uniq concentric tweeter and midrange. They point to the step response measurements and say that the approximately 1 millisecond delay between the peak of the tweeter's movement versus the peak of the bass woofer's movement is responsible for sluggish and incoherent bass.
Yeah, so we're seeing one of these such graphs.
Step response graphs don't actually appear in all that many published reviews, and it doesn't seem to be a priority for the guys posting clipple measurements, although Amir over at Audio Science Review says he tries to include them since so many people ask him to, but he doesn't really seem to care about them much himself. That sent Sasi down a bit of a rabbit hole looking at the step response of other speakers he's familiar with. Ascend's Sierra 1 V2 bookshelf speakers show a fast but not perfectly overlapping step response.
And if you're just glancing at these graphs here, the scale is not the same on all of them, which is very annoying because, of course, naturally your eye is just drawn to the distances between peaks. But yeah, keep an eye on the scale at the bottom of these graphs because it is different. So we've shown the KEF, we've shown the Ascend. Yep.
Bouchard's A10 DSP controlled speakers do have a supposedly perfect step response, but seemingly because the movement of the tweeter has been delayed by the DSP to make sure it overlaps with the movement of the bass woofer.
So we see a single peak. That's multiple drivers, single peak, but it's 4 milliseconds before anything moves, which is a little bit unusual, honestly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. SVS made a big deal in their marketing about the physical timeline of their drivers in their new Ultra Evolution series, but the Ultra Evolution Tower seems to have the least perfect step response yet.
Yeah, again, looking at the scale there, but we're getting upwards of a millisecond before the tweeter moves, and then 4 milliseconds before the bass woofer moves, and then there's a hump and then a second hump because remember you got bass drivers on the front and the back, so you're seeing the response of those back drivers coming half a millisecond after the front drivers just because of the difference in distance, physical distance of the front woofers versus the back woofers there. Yeah.
And then the super highly regarded Genelac and JBL M2 mastering monitors, well, their step response just seemed confusing.
So yeah, we're seeing a couple of multiple humps, even though these are two-way speakers. This is a tweeter and a woofer. In both of these cases, the Genelecs are coaxial, and the M2s, of course, are that waveguide, pretty much a horn with a dual annular diaphragm compression tweeter inside of that M2 waveguide, and then was it a 15-inch or 18-inch? Some old big and honk woofer that it's got in there. It's in those M2s. So, but yeah, he's like looking at those. He goes, well, that doesn't look like perfectly overlapping step response.
So, can we lay it out for him? What's the deal with step response measurements? Are a certain group of people making mountains out of molehills? What's the relevance? How audible is a perfect step response versus an imperfect one? And what's the relationship between the physical alignment of the drivers, the electrical alignment, acoustical alignment, and does the step response graph even provide any useful information about any of that? Rob?
Oh, it's up to me, is it? Yes, because I want your input on this, because I am not 100% confident in my answer here.
Yeah,
There's one thing I'm very confident about.
I've heard the JBL M2s. They sound really good.
Yeah,
I've heard the SVS Evolution speakers. They sound nice also.
Mm-hmm.
It's...
The KEF Metas, the R Metas?
Yeah.
Nice speakers.
Right, so I think you can't take one piece of data and use that to reflect the entire performance of this speaker over,
right.
This is not, in my opinion, you have to understand that the speaker manufacturers are looking at a myriad of capabilities, functionalities of these speakers as they're building and designing them. And I think they know a little bit more about it than the guys on YouTube.
So the thing I am very confident about, because it has been studied at length at the National Research Council in Canada, studied at length by Dr. Floyd Toole, written about all over in the Audio Engineering Society, is that when it comes to correlating some kind of measurement of any given speaker with the way people perceive the accuracy and preferability of the sound of that speaker, frequency response, and not just on-axis frequency response, but frequency response including the off-axis, the family of curves as you go around that speaker, that dominates the perception that anyone has of a speaker so much more than any other parameter, including phase coherence of the individual drivers, even distortion to a large extent. The frequency response dominates your perception of a speaker's sound like tremendously.
Yeah, and all the CDA classes I've taken, including the ones from Floyd Toole himself, we talked a lot about the sound power of a speaker and how that is a better judge of how well that speaker will be, how listenable it will be, how enjoyable it will be. Take a look at off-axis frequency response. Yes. The step response wasn't really ever something that came up.
Yeah, so my own understanding of step response versus impulse response is a little bit shaky. I don't want to try and come out here and act as some sort of educator on the exact difference there, because it's a similar type of measurement in that we're talking about basically a ping of a sound, and then it's a measurement in the time domain. So, I mean, you've got this amplitude response that's coming from the movement of the driver, and then you're measuring that across milliseconds in time. There's a similarity between impulse response and step response there. My understanding is that it's the type of signal that's sent, and then sort of a difference in the it's pretty much just the type of signal that's sent, because the impulse response is like a sudden burst of white noise. It's all frequencies simultaneously. So all drivers activated, and you're just looking at the system response. How quickly does the system, the speaker, respond to that ping of white noise sound? And then that ping of white noise in the signal, the electrical signal, went away immediately. How long does it take for the sound to actually go away from that system? The step response is a stepped response. It's a multi-burst type of thing that's going on. I mean, really, really rapid, right? You're going to hear it.
And energy at different frequencies, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Energy at different frequencies. So what you end up seeing in the step response graph like this is more or less an indication of what we're basically saying is that we do, in fact, have different drivers producing different frequencies. If you just think about the amount of time that it takes for a 10 kilohertz sine wave to be produced versus the amount of time it takes for a 30 hertz sine wave to be produced, it takes longer for the 30 hertz sound wave to even exist. You can have many of the 10,000 hertz sine waves existing in the amount of time it takes for the single 30 hertz sine wave to even exist, right? It hasn't had a chance to go up and down. And so what we're seeing in the step response graph is like, yeah, that SVS speaker, it's like, okay, so the tweeter is responding essentially immediately. That way down deep, that's the mid-range driver, which is inverse polarity to the tweeter, which is a common thing in speaker design and many three-way designs. The mid-range driver is inverse polarity of the tweeter and the woofers. And then there comes the response of the woofers.
It's something else I'll just point out. So I believe the KEF, the Ascend, and I know the SVS are all passively internal crossover speakers,
That
whereas
is another big
the
thing.
Genelac and the JBL, they're talking about a Crown iTech 5000 amp. Those are potentially outboard electronic crossovers, which may account for some of the strange things you're seeing within the step response.
Right. Yes, and basically, if there's something you can glean from the step response and you have some of that knowledge, you can get a little bit of a sense of how steep the crossovers are. If we're talking the passive crossovers in the SVSs or in the Ascends or in the KEFs, you can get a little sense of how steep the slopes are in those passive crossovers from that step response. You can also get a little bit of an indication of what type of frequency the crossovers are being applied. Because like in the case of the SVS Ultra Evolution Pinnacle, it's a really low crossover frequency from the mid-range driver to the bass woofer. That bass woofer isn't even moving until I think isn't it like 100 hertz is the crossover. It's unusually low. For a tower speaker, where normally those woofers, the bass woofers, are acting upwards of 300, 350 hertz. You start having their output there. I know that the Ultra Evolutions, they spec the crossover from the mid-range driver into those bass woofers at a really low frequency. And we're kind of seeing that more than anything else in the step response. It's like, yeah, of course we're not seeing a movement from those bass drivers because they're playing such low frequencies that like they're just starting to make their move while the tweeter's already finished, in this stepped signal that's being sent to it. It wasn't a burst of white noise all simultaneous. It was this stepped signal. So if anything, that's what we're seeing in there. So the notion that you have to have this completely simultaneous step response. I mean, there's nothing in any of the AES studies, in any of the Harman research, in any of the NRC research that indicates that this is a necessity for a good sounding speaker. There's no evidence that the overlapping step response of all the drivers in a speaker is the thing that makes the difference. It's overwhelmingly the evidence is that family of curves, the frequency response that determines the sound. In a case like the Bouchard, where they've got this DSP, it's like, yeah, they had to delay all the higher frequencies. They had to delay the movement of the driver in order to get it to overlap with the bass driver that is naturally not going to start moving until the signal, by virtue of how long it takes for that frequency to start playing, you have to delay all the others. I don't know what that does to the frequency response. I'm not seeing a matching up frequency response graph, but in many cases, when you start monkeying around with the time domain time alignment, you end up messing up the frequency response, and that's a way worse deal. Don't make that trade. Focus on the frequency response and the phase and the coherence and all that type of thing. Much more secondary. So I think that's why guys like Aaron's Audio Corner, guys like Amir at Audio Science Review, they're very much going off of that Harman research. They're very much going off of that NRC research. And they're like, yeah, we're not too worried about the phase coherence of the individual drivers as long as the frequency response. You can have such phase misalignment in the drivers that you end up with suckouts and peaks that are in the crossover regions, and they shouldn't be there. Those show up in the frequency response. So if you fix those, you're naturally going to fix whatever it is you're worried about in the step response.
Now you had a couple of links also here.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, these are, AVS Forum, some really good explanations on how to use Room EQ Wizard and what to pay attention to. One of them really does a great explanation of like, if I could only choose one of these generated graphs from EQ Wizard, here's the one that gives me the most relevant data to go through. So I'll have links to those really good explanations there. And then, just an explanation of what step response is as well. I think that mostly covered that one because I don't want to run out of time here. So let's try and sneak in one or two more, see if we're able to do it. Vasanth, who's in India, a little while back, Vasanth wrote to us when his 55-inch Sony X85J TV got physically damaged. We have an image of that 55-inch Sony TV before it got physically damaged, but yeah, it had it looked like a baseball got thrown into it when he sent an image of that before. So he needed to buy a replacement, and given his viewing distance, he wanted a sizable upgrade in terms of screen size. So he also had a budget that he needed to stick to, so I recommended to him the 75-inch TCL C755, which doesn't have an exact sister model equivalent in North America, but it would basically fall in between the Q6 series that we have here, Q651 we're on right now, and the QM751. It sort of has very similar performance to the Q651, but it does have quantum dots, and it does have more zones of full array local dimming, but not as many as the QM751. So it's sort of a tweener, the C755. We don't have an exact sister model to that here. But Vasanth and his wife did the smart thing, and they visited some stores to see a demo of it in person before they purchased it. And Vasanth loved the size, the price was right for his budget, and when he was looking at it straight on, he loved the picture quality as well, and it seemed like it was a good recommendation on my part. But his wife didn't like that TCL C755 at all, and that's because she made sure to look at it from off angle, from off axis. And if you aren't viewing it from straight on, it definitely washes out. So he had to admit when he got a close enough look at it that if he had a field of view that was larger than a 40-degree angle, so he's close enough that his field of view is, plus minus 20 degrees or greater, the outer edges of the image started to grade in color a little bit, like that amount of off axis. So it was kind of defeated the purpose of getting the much larger screen size if you're going to end up with a non-uniformity across the screen given his seating distance. So while they were at all these stores, they also saw some LG C4 OLEDs in action, and his wife was very impressed, especially with the off-axis performance compared to the TCL LCD TV. So the 77-inch size was never going to happen, not within their budget. Vasanth had to resign himself to only considering the 65-inch, and even then, the price for the C4 would be too high. But then he remembered us saying that from the C3 in 2023 to the C4 in 2024, there wasn't a gigantic difference in that C series OLED. So he hunted around for a while and finally found a 65-inch LG C3 being sold at a price that he could afford. The smaller screen side would simply mean he'd need to move the couch forward a foot to get the same field of view that he was hoping for. So flash forward to today, and he's got the new 65-inch C3 installed, and they fully understand why we praise OLED TVs so much and say they are worth that higher price. Not only is it beautiful, including from off-axis, but he was also surprised at how bright it is. It's like people are always saying that OLEDs are only for dark rooms and you have to get an LED LCD if you have a bright room, and his experience now tells him otherwise. He does have a white room and the lights are on. It's a fairly bright room, but it's not like sun-drenched or something like that. So the brightness and pop of the image meant that they actually felt most comfortable viewing the TV from a little farther away than he had calculated, just based on field of view, and it really worked out perfectly. And they've even spread out their seating a little bit extra so that sitting off-axis experience remains really good, and they don't mind having this wider seating area. So showed some images that were going along of the room that he's dealing with. And he has a question for us. With the new OLED in place, they started watching some Blu-ray discs again. He doesn't have an Ultra HD Blu-ray player yet. More on that in a second. So these are just 1080p standard dynamic range discs, and they look fantastic. He says they appear superior to 4K streaming services, and the DTS HD master audio that is found on most Blu-rays sounds superior to the streaming services as well.
Not a surprise.
Yeah, all of this, we are in full agreement. We don't think you're the least bit nuts with anything that you're reporting back to us. But I like getting that reinforcement and your firsthand experience. So even though a lot of the Blu-ray discs don't have Atmos or DTS-X on them, simply applying the Neural X up mixer seemed to do a great job, and the experience was way better than streaming, in his opinion. So it would make sense. Would it make sense? He's asking us now to get an Ultra HD Blu-ray player. There seems to be two Panasonic models that are most recommended and widely available in India, the UB820 and the UB450. They both say they support HDR10 and Dolby Vision, but the UB820 includes Panasonic's HDR optimizer feature, while the UB450 does not. So does he need the Panasonic HDR optimizer for his C3 LG OLED? Is it worth paying extra money for that? It's like a few $100s extra for that. Or if he chooses the UB450 and saves some money, what would he be missing on that aside from the HDR optimizer? Is there some other downside to getting the UB450? I'll just say right away, I'm envious that the UB450 is available to you. I wish wish we had that model in North America.
Agreed. And I've used these Panasonics quite a bit myself. The 420 is the one that we end up using a lot for projector systems that can't do HDR. I really like the build quality on the 820 better. 820 is a physically a little bit larger machine. I think that the HDR optimizer may not be needed for your current situation with the OLED, but you never know where it might go in the future. So I do think, wait for that unit to go on sale, holidays, whenever it is. I think the 820 is worth spending a little bit more on, buy once, cry once.
That's true. Yeah, I don't disagree. It is the nicer unit. The build quality is almost the thing I care about more because, your C3 for HDR10, it does have LG's dynamic tone mapping if you want to see a little bit more detail in the shadows, which, in a fully lit room, right? Like you're not in a reference grading studio type of situation with a really dim environment. White walls, the lights are on. Sometimes I know it's not strict accuracy, and the accuracy people will come after me. Vincent Tio isn't like what I say, but in that fully lit room, I like LG's dynamic tone mapping. It makes the shadow detail just above black more visible. It keeps the specular highlight detail visible. And I am perfectly happy using LG's dynamic tone mapping for HDR10, which is really, where the HDR optimizer would have any effect. Because if it's Dolby Vision, well, all of that tone mapping is built into the Dolby Vision system. So we're not even worried about either the HDR optimizer from the Panasonic or the LG's dynamic tone mapping. It doesn't really apply with Dolby Vision. So from a feature standpoint, I'm envious of you having the 450 because we don't have the 450 in North America. We have the 420. And the 420 keeps the HDR optimizer feature, but it doesn't have Dolby Vision. And I would rather have a less expensive option that does offer Dolby Vision. I don't mind losing the HDR optimizer when I have LG's dynamic tone mapping available to me. And I would like an option in North America that isn't either the price of the UB820 or is a Sony player that forces me to manually switch Dolby Vision on and off because that is a stupid compromise to have to make. So I wish I had the 450. So I'm going to say I agree with Joe that you can absolutely justify pretty much based on build quality alone the 820 if you can find it at a reasonable price. And it does have all the features and then you can use them. But if money really is like tight, I don't think you'd be disappointed with the 450. I don't think that would be a disappointment performance-wise.
You save money buying the C3. It's all good.
It's true.
And
65-inch versus the 77.
Audio-only listeners, you missed the arms-crossed eye roll I got from Rob the first time I said the 820.
Well, if we hurry through JRs, we might just have enough time for you to tell us about what you watched before you skedaddle.
Sounds good. Last year, JR bought a Sony 75-inch X90K TV. The picture is great, but his wife was not impressed with the laggy Google TV interface. It was rather frustrating to use, often pressing a button and then not being sure if the command had registered due to the lag.
Yeah, I'd feel that.
So he bought an Apple TV 4K and hooked that up. They just use the Apple TV remote, so they're relying on HDMI CEC. Thankfully, with their fairly simple setup, it does, in fact, reliably turn on both the TV and its Marantz receiver along with the Apple TV 4K, and it turns everything off and eventually goes to the correct inputs automatically. But that automatic input switching takes sometimes 10 to 15 seconds when the TV is first turned on. The Google TV interface always shows up first, then it eventually detects that the Apple TV 4K is on and switches itself to the correct HDMI input. But his wife sure would like to be snappier than that. So, is there a way to force the Sony TV to power on and go directly to the Apple TV 4K's input rather than hanging around on the Google TV interface for like 15 seconds first?
And my answer is I'm not 100% sure, but I believe so. And the reason I'm not 100% sure is specifically the Sony X90K. I don't know for 100% sure that this setting I'm about to talk about is present. There's a chance that for some reason it's different than virtually every other TV that uses Google TV as its operating system and interface. But in pretty much every Google TV-based television, it's not intuitive at all where this setting is hidden. If you do go into the TV settings and you go to the system section, there is the power and energy submenu, which you might not think has anything to do with input selection. I wouldn't, just as intuitive as a name, but yes, power and energy under the system submenu. And then in there is the power on behavior that lets you choose either Google TV or last used input. And that's the one you want to choose because by default, it's Google TV. That's what it goes to when the TV first turns on. But there is usually on any Google TV run television the option under power and energy to change the power on behavior to go to the last used TV input. And that should get it to go to the HDMI input right away when it turns on.
The other option is on that Sony, you should have discrete commands. And if you were using some type of a programmable remote, you could set it to go to the right input.
The only thing there is that it does try to, by default, bring up that Google TV interface, and it takes a while to load. It takes a while to load that stupid thing, and it won't even respond to your discrete remote command until it's loaded up its dumb ads, because that's what they really want you to see. So yeah, since Joe has to skedaddle pretty darn soon, I'm going to say Manuel's question for next week. In fact, Lee might have a really good input on that, so that wouldn't hurt at all, and I'll try to send him an email in the meantime so he isn't waiting forever and ever, but I don't know if he's going to love my answer, because it's not the cheapest thing on earth. But anyway, before Joe goes, I just wanted to hear what you watched this past, while, because we haven't talked to you in a little while, and you had some interesting stuff on your list there.
Yeah, I kind of had a interesting video watching weekend. So these are all pretty much things that I watched, my wife and I together. So we recently had a trip to Italy and got to visit Rome and saw the Colosseum, saw the Circus Maximus, which inspired us to go back and watch the 1959 Best Picture 11 Academy Award-winning film Ben-Hur.
Yeah.
Had never seen this movie before, had bought it on my Kaleidoscape.
Really?
Yeah. And we've
treat.
also, it was fantastic. But we've been working our way through, we printed out the list of best pictures going all the way back to when the Academy Awards started giving them, and we've just been crossing them off the list as we've seen them. So that counts for another one that I'll get to in a second. Ben-Hur, did not realize how crucially that story is tied to the Christian story of, you see Wiseman at the beginning and you see a crucifixion at the end. So it very much follows that. Goes from Nazareth, Judea, Rome. But the highlight of the film by far is the chariot race.
The chariot race. And now you know where so many other homages in so many other movies, including very obviously the pod racing in Star Wars Episode 1. It all came from that chariot race in Ben-Hur.
And there were maybe some special effects. Yeah, you can tell they were getting a dummy run over someplace, but that was practical for all intents and purposes.
And people did get injured in that, and horses got injured in that.
You've got 9 teams that start with 4 horses, 36 horses, 9 men on the field. I think somewhere I read that 10 finish, only 9 start. But that's
and they were not CGI horses when they made this movie. That did not exist.
And it looks like Charlton Heston's really out there in chariot, so it was impressive. If you haven't ever seen it before, definitely worth a watch. It's interesting from a filmography standpoint to look at just the pacing of the movies, how different they are, how much slower things. I mean, the first hour and a half could have been told in 10 minutes if they wanted to, but it really sets up all the characters. You get a much better understanding for it. But yeah, very well done.
And it's that extra wide
aspect
ratio.
And
I can't remember if that was Todd AO or not.
278 to 1, I think.
Yeah,
is the ratio.
yeah.
Because I have a 235 to 1 screen. I'm going, why am I seeing black bars?
You still got black bars. Wow, that's right.
Really wide. So we watched that one day. The other one we watched off of the Best Picture list was Rain Man, another movie I had never seen. My wife saw it years ago. So fun to watch. We purchased that one on Apple TV, I believe, $4.99 or whatever it was. Picture and sound were fine, but it's obviously a movie from the 90s. Ben-Hur, like I said, we watched on the Kaleidoscape. Rain Man, acting in it was very good. Tom Cruise came off as a bit of a jerk for most of the movie, but finally found some redemption. Meant to,
though, that's not by accident.
Right, towards the end of it. A lot of the lines that you're used to hearing Kmart and Judge Wapner and underwear and all that kind of things, you understand where they all come from and what role they play in the film after seeing it. So that was fun to do. Also, boy, he looks a lot younger in that movie. Seeing it. So, but yeah, good one to watch. And then the third one, so we're recording this on a Tuesday night. I think he's probably downstairs watching the vice presidential U.S. candidate debate. So we watched the movie Hillbilly Elegy. And nice this is one of the vice presidential candidates tells his backstory, which was pretty interesting, taking place in, the deep South and the very rural country all the way to, going to school at Yale Law, I believe it was. this was a Ron Howard film, and this is one we watched on Netflix. So I had a Kaleidoscape, an Apple TV, and a Netflix film. We watched this one downstairs on the Panasonic Plasma that we have down there. The other two we watched up here in the theater on the big screen. It felt like a Ron Howard film. Mm-hmm. There were characters you just could not stand in the middle. There's a strong redemptive arc. I thought it was well done. It was definitely more my wife's kind of movie than mine, but glad I got a chance to see it.
Very nice. I don't know if you have enough time for me to say mine real quick before
I
you
do
go.
Want to hear about one of those specifically, so please do.
Okay, so I will just say very quickly, watch the second episode of The Penguin on HBO Max or Max. I guess it's on Crave up here in Canada because we don't even have Max. But yeah, it continues to be fantastic. So I'm really glad that it wasn't just only the pilot that was excellent. And I was remiss last week mentioning one of the actors, Renzi Feliz. He plays a character named Victor, who I don't think is set up to become Victor Zsasz. I think it's just a separate Victor. He has a different last name, although, in DC Comics, people's names can change at any moment. But his acting is right up. He's right beside Colin Farrell this whole time, putting on a masterful performance like you never seen before, and he's right up there with him, keeping pace. So yeah, everybody involved in this. God, the acting's good. It's so good.
I gotta watch those. I'm looking forward to watching.
Yeah. So, yes, the movie that I saw in previews in IMAX, Laser IMAX, Joker Folie à Deux. And, I am almost certainly going to be a bit of an outlier here because I'm seeing some of the reviews being posted, and by and large, people are not loving this sequel, not loving this movie that much, and I understand why. I don't think that they're out to lunch by not liking this movie as much as Joker. It is a very different movie from Joker. It is a bummer. It is a bummer of a movie. And so if you want to come out of this movie feeling jazzed and energized and pumped up, that ain't going to happen. This is a dour, depressing movie.
Wow. Did you like the first one?
I loved the first one.
See, I was mediocre on the first one.
Okay. And the first one had such momentum to it. And many people responded to that. And it built and it built and it built. And it had this, sort of orgasmic in an evil way ending to the whole thing. And many people responded to that. I responded to that for sure. This sequel is a response to that. It is, in many ways, a very responsible response to it. And that's why I don't think many people are going to like this movie. This is like, they take the phrase that Joker used at the end of Joker, the first one. You get what you bleeping deserve. And it turns that around in an almost audience contempt type of way. It's like, you're going to cheer for this guy? You're going to cheer on this manipulative, awful version of Harley Quinn? You're going to follow these bad guys and cheer for the bad guy and think that they're doing the right thing by killing these people? You're the audience. You're going to get what you effing deserve.
Interesting.
Like yeah.
Also, note both the things you watched are DC Batman villains in their own shows. So it's really interesting that the main heroic character is missing for both of those, but they're telling
no
entire side stories with those characters.
Yeah. And I mean, this is very... So, much has been made. It's a musical. It's not a musical of the sort where they wrote original songs for it. This is all, in fact, standards. It's old standards. It's Frank Sinatra. It's, that era of music. And as many, I don't think this is a spoiler in any way, as anybody could predict, the songs are predominantly his imagination, right? It's his imagining how he wants things to go or what he thinks might happen or misremembering the way things did go. And it's all very well explained in that he's saying that when he killed on live television at the end of the Joker, that he blacked out. This is the story that's being told as basically his defense, because this is largely a courtroom drama as well, which is another thing people might not like, because courtroom procedural is not necessarily the most exciting, energetic thing. But the story that he's telling is that he blacked out, and the only thing he remembers from that night is the band playing. That's all he remembers. At least that's the story that's being told. Surprise, surprise, the Joker is not a reliable narrator.
Did you ever read The Dark Knight, Frank Miller's graphic novel?
Yes. Yeah.
So there are elements from that first movie, that talk show, that are all very incorporated into the film. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah. So the singing I was really impressed by, including Joaquin Phoenix's singing.
Really?
He's not the the greatest singing vocalist, but he puts all of his acting talent into emoting the lyrics. And so in that way, excellent performer. Lady Gaga as Harley Quinn, of course, excellent singer.
Is he as painfully thin in this one as he was in the first?
Very nearly so.
Yeah.
The opening is shocking, and how Joaquin Phoenix goes up and down in his weight like that, I don't know how
healthy.
he does it. It can't possibly be healthy. I did feel there were maybe too many songs. It could have cut out about 2 of the songs that were in here. I know there were people I heard around me in the audience kind of like a little bit when they got to the last couple of songs, like another song. It's like you kind of felt like maybe it overstayed its welcome a little bit in that way. So yeah, I see all the criticisms of it, but I really liked it. I really like a filmmaker who's going to come along and say, I intended Joker to be a one-off. It was supposed to be a one-off. It was so successful that the studio came back to me and said, hey, make a sequel. And he's like, I'm not just going to make a sequel. I'm not just going to even continue the story in a similar way. I'm going to give you what you deserve. And I really appreciate for that. It's also beautiful. It's beautiful, but I miss the outdoor shots. There are a few outdoor shots, and they're gorgeous. And they're almost like, drone or helicopter looking shots. The rest of the movie, it feels so closed in because Arthur Fleck, Joker, is so closed in. He is so
courtroom drama,
contained courtroom and jail cells and solitary confinement and all the rest of it, and it feels it. But I mean, you're meant to feel bad, and this movie makes me feel bad, but I appreciate it for the artistry of how it did that and the bursts into song, because a lot of people don't like musicals, and I'm like, no, it was all done really, really well. I like this movie a lot. I also am the person who loved Pearl out of that trilogy of X, Pearl, and Maxine. I adored Pearl, and many people, that's by far their least favorite of the 3. And there are similarities between Pearl and Joker Folie à Deux. So it's not a surprise to me that I like both of these films. But yes, if you're looking for a feel-good, energetic time, this ain't it. This is the Joker went up and up and up, and Joker Folie à Deux comes down and down and down.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to sign off for now. I actually have tickets to go see Beetlejuice in about 20 minutes, so I'm going to say goodbye. I will send you my files later on this evening.
That sounds perfect. Thank you so much, Joe, for filling in here on exceedingly short notice. Now you know what Lee has felt like all these years.
Appreciate it. Thanks for letting me be here.
Thank you. So as I hinted at, I'm going to go ahead and carry on with this week's news, because we didn't get to that before. So we already covered most of the details about SVS's new 17 Ultra Revolution series subwoofers. So those are available now on their website, fully available for you to order. But back at CEDIA is where they first appeared. October 1st is when they became fully available, and they are currently shipping in all of their gloss black glory. The black oak optional finish will start shipping on October 22nd. So despite that larger 17-inch dual voice coil, dual monoblock amplified driver, the footprint of the cabinets remains the same as the outgoing 16 Ultra series. The sealed SB17 Ultra comes in at basically a 20-inch cube, but it weighs 124 pounds, and they are claiming 15 hertz extension for its $2,500 price tag. If you order a pair of them together at the same time, you get a discounted price of $47.50, saving you $250. On the back of these 17 Ultra series is where you find all of the controls. They have done away with the front panel control, but you do still have the SVS app that you can use, and they are promising that coming in the future is a sort of automated EQ system that just uses the microphone that's built into your smartphone and then uses that SVS app to apply automated EQ, at least at the listening position. So the counterpart to the SB17 Ultra that we're seeing in an exploded view to see this amazing new driver, then I'm pretty sure they said that magnet on the back of that is 55 pounds all by itself, so contributing to that 124-pound weight. But the counterpart to the sealed one is, of course, the ported box, the PB17 Ultra Revolution, and that's coming in at about 22 inches wide, 29 inches deep, and 25 inches high. It is a big subwoofer, and it tips the scales at nearly 165 pounds. It is claiming a 12 hertz or 14 hertz extension. It's got 3 ports. You plug one of those ports and they claim 12 hertz extension with slightly less headroom. They are 4-inch diameter flared ports, and the price is $3,000 for one of them. But if you're buying a pair of them together at the same time, $5,700, saving you $300 when you do that. It's got the same amplifier on the back as the SB17 Ultra, but with some slightly different tuning applied to it. And then, yes, in the exploded view of that, you can see those very lengthy, wide flared ports at the bottom, 3 of them, so very similar exploded view driver, the dual voice coils, the dual monoblock amplifiers. So yeah, pretty tremendous stuff coming there and fully available now. Our next news story, Audioholics actually got the scoop on the official announcement from Arendal Sound on their new flagship 1528 series of speakers. The 1723 THX series remains in Arendal's lineup, but they are now the step-down series. So all of the 1528 speaker models use a 3-way design. The tweeter that is used in all of the models is a first-of-its-kind lithium-magnesium 1.1-inch dome. And they claim that it has even lower density than beryllium while still providing high stiffness with good internal damping. The material is very fragile, though, so it cannot be touched, and it has a tiny metal grill in front of it that cannot be removed to physically protect it. So as part of the 3-way design that is used in all of these models, they all have that same lithium magnesium 1.1-inch dome tweeter. Then they have a 5-inch graphene mid-range cone. And the tweeter and mid-range driver are integrated together into a steel waveguide that's designed to position the 2 drivers as physically close to one another as possible, with the tweeter directly above the mid-range driver. And it's in a waveguide to try and produce wide, even dispersion. The bass woofers in all of them are 8-inch aluminum cones, so common drivers across all of the 1528 models. The cabinets are made from HDF, high-density fiberboard, not MDF, and all of the sides are nearly 1 inch thick. The front baffle, though, stands out. It is unusually thick at 3.15 inches. And if you thought SVS did something kind of new with their curved front baffles, well, Arendal is here to one-up them. They've curved the front baffles of the 1528 series in 2 directions. So it's like from top to bottom, there's a curve, and then on the outside, it's kind of cupped in. So the whole thing is rather concave. Just like SVS, they're claiming this produces better time alignment across the drivers. You can go back in this very episode to hear what Joe and I were talking about when it comes to time alignment. So there are 4th order internal crossovers, steep crossovers between those drivers, and there are jumpers on the back so you can manually increase or decrease the tweeter and mid-range output by plus or minus 2 decibels from the default. I always like to say when a speaker manufacturer offers that kind of adjustment that it's there to basically make sure you can never claim that the speaker is to blame. They can basically always say, well, it was up to you to adjust it to your room. So yeah, I'm not necessarily a gigantic fan. That's such a small difference too, and people are going to be worried about the minutia. But yeah, anyway, that adjustment is there. Power handling on these new models way up compared to the previous series. In fact, the tower speaker is spec'd to handle 1,000 watts. So hopefully you have a very beefy amplifier on hand. Sensitivity is actually lower, though. And the bookshelf and monitor models are only spec'd at 84 and 85 decibels per watt. So you're going to need some high power handling in order to get all the output that the speakers are capable of. So what is the actual lineup and the prices? Well, we start with the 1528 Tower 8. It uses 4 of those 8-inch bass woofers. It weighs 174 pounds per tower, so it is heavier than SVS's PB17 Ultra Sub. This is a very, very heavy tower. It comes with what they're calling their Puck Plus feet. But, Puck Plus, not good enough. They also offer the Puck Pro feet for $400 for a set of them if you want to upgrade the compliance of the feet. Thankfully, not spikes. I like that. They're actually going for isolating feet. But kind of strange that right off the bat, they're like, oh, you gotta upgrade the Puck Plus that comes with. Get the Puck Pro. But anyway, the feet let you manually adjust the front versus back height by a few inches in case you want to rake back the perfectly time-aligned curved front baffles. In any case, they cost $9,500 for a pair. That's the retail price. From there, we move on to the 1528 Monitor 8. And this is kind of an interesting design. It's a three-way, as all of them are, but it's got two of the 8-inch woofers. It weighs 106 pounds, but it's 32 inches tall. It is meant to be on a stand. It just better be a sturdy one, because 106 pounds for this thing. They are $5,900 for a pair. We then move on to the 1528 Bookshelf 8, which, as you might expect, has one of the 8-inch woofers. Still handles 500 watts of power handling, but only that 84 dB sensitivity that we mentioned before. $4,500 for a pair of those. Then they've got an interesting model, the 1528 Slim 8, and that takes the same driver complement as the Bookshelf 8, but it puts it in a wall-mountable 7.8-inch depth from front to back sealed cabinet for $3,500 a pair. So they actually charge less for the smaller sealed cabinet. Not everybody does that, as we're actually going to find out in the next news story. But the mounting solution on the back is just a standard Visa 100 by 100 mounting pattern. So I think that's really nice. You can use like any standard small TV monitor mount as the wall mount for the 1528 Slim 8 speaker. Then they got a couple of center channels. You got the 1528 Center Plus 8, and that's basically a Tower 8 turned on its side. You got the tweeter mid-range stack now rotated 9 degrees, so the tweeter is still above the mid-range driver, and then the 4 8-inch woofers are positioned 2 on either side of that tweeter mid-range stack. Those go for $4,700 each. And finally, you've got the 1528 Center 8, no plus in that name. It's basically the Monitor 8 on its side with 2 of the 8-inch woofers on either side of the tweeter mid-range stack. Those go for $2,900 each. So all of those models are available in either a satin white or a satin black finish, and they are all ported except for that sealed Slim 8 model, but they all come with optional port plugs included. So running them sealed is an option. Now, Sasi gave me the heads up that KEF also announced a whole new series of speakers. They're bringing that metamaterial backwave absorption technology that they first had, and I think those showed up in the LS50 metas first, and then they came to the R Meta Series. So now, surprise, surprise, it's the Q Meta Series that's getting that meta material backwave absorption technology. So they're, sort of entry-level speakers. The Q Series, they're getting that meta. It's the Q Meta Series. So all of the drivers in this series are aluminum. And you've got black, white, and walnut finish options for all models. KEF is now up to their 12th generation of their Uni-Q concentric tweeter and mid-range design. And as mentioned, they have that metamaterial absorption technology, abbreviated as MAT. So let's go through that lineup. You've got the Q1 Meta is the smaller bookshelf model. It's using a 1-inch aluminum tweeter and a 5.25-inch concentric woofer that is surrounding that 1-inch tweeter. They go for $600 for the pair. So they are sold as a pair, not a single. $600 a pair for the Q1 Meta. Then, if you keep those same drivers as the Q1 Meta, but you put them into a 5.6-inch deep wall-mountable cabinet, you get the Q4 Meta, which is kind of a new design. The price, though, is quite a bit higher. You're seeing $500 on the website versus $600, but that is $600 for the pair of the Q1 Meta bookshelf speakers. For some reason, the slimmer wall-mountable Q4 Meta is $500 each. So that'd be $1,000 for the pair. Quite a bit more expensive. On the back, they've got 4 keyhole mounts, one in each corner, and they're actually on a little bit of a standoff, providing a little bit of a gap from the wall, and there's a somewhat unusual side-firing port on the Q4 Meta. So an interesting design, but a wall-mountable, flatter design added to the Q series. If we keep the same drivers once again, the 1-inch aluminum dome tweeter, the 5.25-inch aluminum concentric woofer around that, but you put them in a sealed wedge-shaped cabinet. Now you have the Q8 Meta speakers. They can be wall-mounted up high as height speakers or placed on top of other speakers and used as upward-firing Atmos modules, and they go for $800 for a pair. So if we recap that, the Q1 Meta bookshelf speakers are $600 for a pair, the Q8 Meta wedge-shaped speakers are $800 for a pair, and the Q4 wall-mountable slim Meta speakers would be $1,000 a pair. Those are the price points going across those, all of them using the same drivers. Now, If we look at the next model, it's the larger bookshelf, the Q3 Meta. It's the same 1-inch tweeter, but now a 6.5-inch concentric woofer around it. Those go for $800 a pair if you want the bookshelf model. And then there's another new model in the Q Meta lineup as opposed to the old Q series. They've got a Q Concerto Meta. It's a 3-way bookshelf monitor now, not a 2-way. And all of the 3-way models, because the towers and the center are also 3-way, in addition to the Q Concerto, they all use a 0.75-inch, a 3/4-inch tweeter that's in a 4-inch concentric mid-range driver around it, and then a single 6.5-inch woofer in the case of the Q Concerto Meta, and those are selling for $1,300 a pair. If you make it 2 of the 6.5-inch woofers instead of 1 and a tower form factor, you get the Q7 Meta selling for $900 each, or $1,800 a pair. And finally, the largest tower has 3 of the 6.5-inch woofers, and that's the Q11 Meta. That's the flagship. They are $1,100 each, $2,200 for a pair. And there is only one center speaker announced right now. It's quite large. It's a 3-way design. It's still got that 3/4-inch tweeter, a 4-inch concentric mid-range dedicated driver surrounding it, and then 2 of the 6.5-inch woofers on either side, and that is selling for $800 each, so a little bit less expensive than the Q7 Meta towers, but it is a smaller cabinet, being the center speaker design. They call it an LCR, a left, center, right speaker, since it can also be used vertically. So that's the new Q Meta Series, and thank you to Sasi for giving me the heads up about that. I said there was a lot of news this week, and so we are not done yet. NAD, sometimes called NAD, right? They have a new AV receiver model that was on display at CEDIA, and we didn't cover it yet. So it is the new T799 model, and it comes with 11 channels of amplification built in. That's 100 watts per channel. And they do say that doubles down to 200 watts into 4 ohms. That's 100 watts per channel into 8 ohms. But it can process up to 15 speaker channels, and it comes with 4 independent subwoofer pre-outs. So it can do a full 9.4.6 configuration, and NAD uses Dirac for their room correction. And with those 4 independent subwoofer pre-outs, it's fully ready for Dirac Live bass control. They say that it's going to start shipping next year, and they've priced it at $7,000. That is, of course, quite a bit of money, but if you look at, say, Denon's A1H, which is also 15.4 independent subwoofer outputs and, can do 9.4.6 as its maximum configuration, that Denon is $6,500 MSRP. So this NAD T799 is not wildly more expensive than the Denon, that it goes right up against, toe to toe in terms of features. So yeah, that could be an interesting one. If you want an AV receiver of that feature set that comes with Dirac built in, because the Denon A1H comes with Odyssey Multi-Q XT32 built in. It has the option to run Dirac, but you'd have to pay extra to get it. The NAD T799 comes with Dirac Live Full by default. You'd have to pay extra to get the Dirac Live bass control. But yeah, that would come with Dirac by default. Couple more news stories to get to, if you can believe it. It'll have to go through regulatory approval, but private equity firm TPG, they've reached an agreement, at least in terms of everybody's shaking hands on it, as long as the regulators approve it, to fully acquire DirecTV from AT&T. TPG already own 30% of DirecTV, but they'll now be acquiring the remaining 70% from AT&T. And then once they've done that, they have an agreement to buy Dish and Sling TV from EchoStar, the owners of those brands, for, get this, $1. But they're also taking on half of Dish's $20 billion in debt. So that would combine the 2 U.S. satellite TV companies, which is an idea that's been floated before, but it was blocked back in 2002 by the FCC and the Department of Justice. But now with both companies, DirecTV and Dish, they've shrunk a lot. They're repositioning themselves as internet providers, cell phone providers, streaming providers. So TPG believes they can secure regulatory approval now. And then they say there's going to be cost synergies to the tune of $1-2 billion, which is, layoffs. That's what cost synergies are. Yeah, redundant positions between the two companies. So I'm not sure that bodes all that well. when private equity comes in and decides that they're going to turn around companies and merge them and try to make a profit in the end of all things. Yeah, that's usually leading to the winding down of these things, but we kind of saw the writing on the wall for satellite TV providers anyway. We'll see if FCC and Justice Department approve this sort of thing. Not going to happen till next year. Okay, so I'm going to wrap things up this week with one final news story. Meta, they have made it official. Starting on October the 15th, they will have a simplified Meta Quest VR, AR, virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality headset lineup. They used to have the Quest 2, the Quest 3, the Quest Pro. They're going to simplify that starting October 15th. The Quest 3 is going to remain in the lineup as the higher end option now. The Quest Pro, no more. That's discontinued. And there's just going to be a single SKU of the Quest 3, a 512 gigabyte storage model that'll sell for $500. But also gone, in addition to the Quest Pro being gone, the Quest 2 is gone, and in its place, there's now a lower cost option in the form of the Quest 3S. And there will be two SKUs of that, a 128 gigabyte storage version for $300 and a 256 gigabyte storage version for $400. So, what's nice here between the 3 and the 3S? The same head straps, the same accessories, they work across both the 3 and the 3S, so that simplifies things. The 3S uses the same processor. It includes the same full-color stereoscopic pass-through cameras on the front, so the experience of using either headset model should be a lot more similar now. You don't have the lower power and the black and white only pass-through cameras that the Quest 2 used to have. But to get that Quest 3S price down, it uses the same lower resolution than the Quest 3. The Quest 3S has the same LCD panels that were in the Quest 2, the same 3-position only with adjustment for that IPD, the interpupillary distance between your two eyes. It's just 3 fixed positions, whereas it's fully variable in the Quest 3. There are the thicker lenses in the 3S. The overall thickness of the headset is the entire design is essentially the same as the old Quest 2. And so the 3S really is like a blending of the Quest 2 and the Quest 3. You take more or less the same display and weight and thickness and wearing comfort of the Quest 2. You take all of those things, but you add the better pass-through cameras and the higher-end processor of the Quest 3, and you mash those things together and you get the 3S. Also, of note, they've removed the headphone jack. So you're either using the built-in speakers that are in those side straps, or you're using Bluetooth speakers. Or I suppose there's a way to, connect things to the USB output, but yeah, that would seem a little weird to have a dongle on your VR headset. So yeah, there we go. That's everything for this week. Huge thanks to Joe Klusnick for filling in. The plan is to have Lee Overstreet here next week, but we'll see if that all works out. Who knows what's going to happen these days. But yeah, before I go, I want to thank our listeners of the week one more time. You can come to patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So big thanks to our 134 patrons who are signed up right now. I want to thank Rohan and Peter. Both of them sent in movie codes that, fingers crossed, it won't be too long before Tom is able to redeem those and make use of them. That would be very, very nice. We're hoping for that to happen as swiftly as possible. We know from experience it's going to be a while going through all the insurance and that. And then, yes, notes of gratitude to the people, from the people who are, saying thanks for keeping this podcast going, and gratitude to them for sending those in. We need that encouragement right now. So thank you to Sasi, Rohan, Stefan, Gav, Ilango, Karl, Greg, Jorge, Gurinder, Fred, Vasanth, and Manuel. Very much appreciated. And of course, all of us are thinking about Tom and his family right now, really hoping that everything will be put back together. I can get back to normal life before too long, but it's going to be a challenge for sure. It was a heck of a lot of damage from this hurricane this time. So our thoughts are with Tom and his family, and we'll see what happens in the future of AVRant here as we go along. But my intention is to keep going as long as I am able. Who knows? There might be even weeks where I'm all by myself. That's not the plan. That's not the hope, but we'll see what happens. So if you would like to get your questions answered on this podcast, all you have to do is ask. You send them to us via email at question@avrant.com. That is the email address and by far the best way to reach us. So on behalf of Tom Andry, with my thanks to Joe Klusnick, this has been AVRant. I am Rob H. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.